Good morning and welcome to our first meeting of the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections for the 2025-2026 interim. Mr. Gibbs, can you please call the roll?
Senator Daly.
Here.
Vice Chair Orenshaw.
Present.
Senator Steinbeck. Assemblymember Dickman. Assemblymember Hibbets. Assemblymember Moore.
Here.
Assemblymember Mosca.
Here.
Chair Gonzalez.
I am here, thank you. I think Assemblymember Dickman is on the Zoom. Sorry, and then please mark Assemblymember Hibbets present if he arrives. Members who are joining us on Zoom, please remember to keep your video on and your microphone off when you are not speaking. And please remember the chat feature is only for technical assistance from our AVH staff. Before we begin, I would like to make a few housekeeping announcements. Please silence all electronic devices, including your cell phones. While speaking, please turn off the microphone each time you are finished speaking. Agenda items may be taken out of order, combined, or postponed. Members of the public, if you would like to receive email notifications when meeting materials, including agendas, are posted on the committee's website, you can sign up for notifications on the Nevada Legislature's website. Meeting materials received prior to the meeting have been uploaded to the committee's webpage. And finally, you might see some of us using our laptops to follow along with presentations or take notes. Please do not take that as a sign of disrespect. At this time, I would like to take a few minutes to allow members and staff to introduce themselves. I will have our committee policy analyst start us off.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hibbets is here. Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen Sturm-Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. I have been with the Legislative Council Bureau for 10 years. And this is actually my first time on Legislative Operations and Elections, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Hi, Kelsey Delosier, legal. I have been with LCB for a little under 4 years. I staffed Leg Ops last session, but this is my first interim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron MacDonald, Senior Deputy Legislative Counsel. I'll be serving as committee co-counsel with my colleague, Kelsey Delosier, and I'm looking forward to working with this committee this interim. Thank you.
Haley, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Haley Prohl, Senior Principal Policy Analyst and GIS Specialist with the Research Division. I have been with LCB for 7 years now. This is my third interim staffing the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. Looking forward to supporting the committee.
Thank you. I would also like to call out the assistance we receive from other staff, including Tim Gibbs, our research division, Nancy Morris, our principal program analyst with the fiscal analyst division, as well as staff from general services, information technology services, and our audio, visual, and hearings team. We cannot do this work or run these meetings without you. Thank you so much. For our members, let's start with those in the north, and then we'll come back down to Las Vegas. So if you would like to introduce yourselves, the district you represent, and the experience that you have on the committee.
I'll go first, I guess. My name is Skip Daly, represent Senate District 13, and I've served on the Legislative Operations and Elections Committee for 4 terms in the Assembly and 2 in the 2 sessions in the Senate, and on the Interim Committee for all of that time as well. So happy to be here and looking forward to this interim as we head into the next session.
Thank you. Assemblymember Dickman, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, apologies. I was all set to go and then my computer died. So now I'm on my iPad. I hope it's working okay. Jill Dickman, I represent Assembly District 31. I've served on Ledge Ops for 3 terms and also the interim. And looking forward to the work we do here.
Thank you so much. I think that's everyone in Carson City. So we will come back down to Las Vegas, starting with our Vice Chair, Senator Orangeall.
Thank you very much, Chair. Senate District 21, and like Senator Daley up in Northern Nevada, I've been very lucky to get to serve on the Legislative Operations Elections Committee on both the State Senate and in the Assembly, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to chair both committees over in the Assembly and in the Senate. Proud of the work our committees have done, and I'm excited to get to serve with you, Chair, and with our members this interim.
Thank you. Likewise. Next, we can go to Senator Steinbeck.
Thank you, Chair. John Steinbeck, Senate District 18, which is the northwest part of the valley, and I was on Ledge Ops last session. Was my first time. I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. Next, let's go to Assemblymember Hibbets.
Thank you, Chair. Brian Hibbets, Assembly District 13, nestled in Senate District 18. And this is my second interim on legislative operations and elections, and I serve on the committee during the regular session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. Next, let's go to Assemblymember Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Assemblymember Moore. I represent Assembly District 11. I served on the on Ledge Ops during regular session, and this is my first interim as well in serving in this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Excited to have you as well. And next we will go to Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you so much, Chair. Assemblymember Mosca, I represent Assembly District 14, was on the interim last session, chaired last session. I'm very excited to support our new chair who's doing a great job. And I'm really grateful to hear again from all of our elections and Ledge Ops folks.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. And I'm excited. My name is Cecilia Gonzalez, and I represent Assembly District 16. And I have been on Ledge Ops for 3 regular terms or sessions, as well as I think this is my 3rd interim. Don't quote me on that, but this is my longest standing committee that I've been on. So very excited for the work that we do here. A lot of amazing policies that have come out of this committee, and just really excited to make sure that everyone has access to vote. I think that's, the most important thing. So very excited to be with all of you all and to do the work this interim. The committee has a wide variety of experience, and I'm grateful for the wealth of knowledge that each of you all bring. And like I said, I'm very excited for our interim this year. So next we're going to move on to public comment. And during interim meetings, we have 2 opportunities for public comment, one at the beginning of our meeting and one at the end. Members of the public can provide testimony in person, over the phone, via email, or by mail. If you are testifying in person, please remember to sign in at the table by the door with your information. It helps our staff when we do minutes. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name before you begin and limit your comments to 2 minutes. We will have time for each speaker during public comment to ensure everyone has a fair opportunity to speak. If you wish to provide public comment over the phone, the number is 888-475-4499, and the meeting ID for today is 821-0029-0324. And then you press the pound key. You press the pound key again if it asks for our participant ID. We will start in Las Vegas if anybody would like to give public comment. All right, seeing none, we will go to Carson City.
The building is still
none, I know
technically
it's a very
closed,
cold morning
so
in Carson
nobody
City
here.
today. We will go to our phones. AVH, do we have anyone who would like to make public comment at this time?
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to provide public comment, please press *9 now.
Good morning. My name is Ellen Gifford, ELLEN, GI as in Frank, ORD as in David. Allowing public observance of the election process is declared to be the law in United States Code 245, Nevada's Constitution, and no less than 7 Nevada revised statutes. U.S. Code states that whoever interferes with any person acting as a poll watcher shall be fined or imprisoned. Nowhere in any of these documents and statutes does it state that someone who wishes to observe the people's election process must disclose their party affiliation, nor is it mentioned that seating for the public will be limited to 3 people. 1 seat for a Democrat, 1 seat for a Republican, and 1 seat for nonpartisan. Yet in the 2024 general elections, such limitations existed at various poll locations, with citizens being prohibited from observing their election process. Acts of this nature towards citizens who wish to observe elections are a form of intimidation and in violation of the aforementioned laws. Nevada's legislators must address these acts with legislation that declares them as a Class E felony, commensurate with NRS 293710 and NRS 293705, supporting the rights of Nevada citizens. The Nevada legislative website states that interim committees hold public hearings, direct research, and deliberate on proposals for legislation to be considered during the next legislative session. We respectfully request that this committee exercise these duties and propose that legislation prohibiting these acts of intimidation be considered in the next Nevada legislative session. We also request this committee lead the initiation of a process for preventing these acts in the 2026 elections. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Chair?
AVH. Oh, yeah.
My apologies, Chair. We have no additional public comment at this time.
Thank you. Seeing no more public comment, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is our committee policy analyst is going to go over our committee's duties and responsibilities.
Thank you. Jen Sturm-Gainer, Committee Policy Analyst. As nonpartisan staff, I cannot advocate for or against any measure before the committee. My colleague Haley Prohl and I put together this brief, the committee brief, to outline the main duties and responsibilities of the committee and to remind members of recent legislation and available resources. So I think you're all familiar with the items laid out in the committee brief, so I won't go into detail, but as you go through it on your have any questions, I'm happy to follow up with you later. I would just like to note that this committee may request up to 10 BDRs for the 2027 session, and then also quickly highlight the table beginning on page 3 that summarizes significant legislation passed in recent sessions. This is not meant to be an all-inclusive list, but just highlights some of the more major during the 2025 session and the 2025 special session. You may hear on some of these topics throughout the interim, including updates from some of our presenters today. And then finally on page 5, we listed various resources that members may be interested in reviewing, including relevant reports and publications, as well as resources produced by the Secretary of State's office. There are several publications produced by the Research Division that anyone can access, including How to Register to Vote in Nevada, How to Vote in Nevada, Canvassing the Vote in Nevada, on Nevada's election process. And those are included in your committee binders and over on the table as you enter the room. We have also linked to several of these publications in the committee brief, and starting next week, these links will take you to the updated 2026 versions of the publications. We've also included them as separate exhibits to this agenda item, so you can go through those at your leisure. We were unfortunately unable to send the printed pamphlet version of the How to Vote in Nevada and How to Register to Vote in Nevada publications to Las Vegas due to the inclement weather in Carson City, but we can certainly make those available if anyone would like a copy. And with that, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at this committee brief and the publications that are prepared by the Research Division when you have time. I like reading them. They're very informative. I like reading other committees that I'm not on as well because, again, they're very informative. So now I'd like to move on to our next agenda item, which is a presentation on the findings from the local election official survey conducted by the Elections and Voting Information Center. Today we have Dr. Paul Manson, who is the research director for the Elections and Voting Information Center, to the table. Thank you so much for being here and giving this presentations on the findings from local elections, including a breakdown of the findings and trends both nationally and within Nevada. Again, thank you so much for being here. I think you traveled to be here, correct?
Yes.
Yes, so thank you so much. We appreciate it, and please go ahead whenever you're ready.
It was there. Good morning. Chair Gonzalez, Vice Chair Orenshaw, and members of the Joint Interim Committee on really honored to join you today. I apologize. I was sharing with staff curse of a Mac user coming into the Windows world, so apologize for delay. Really excited to join you here today. What I want to do is share some of the research we've been doing on the experience and organizational and budget challenges around the U.S. for election offices. And what I'll start with is just a little overview of what we do and how we do that. Since 2018, my team has been surveying 3,000, we sent out a sample to 3,000 offices across the US, asking local election officials about their experience in administering elections and the challenges they face in different administrative tasks. One of the key challenges we have as researchers, and you may have encountered this looking at elections across the US, we have a hard time defining exactly who to ask these questions to. States divide up the duties of election administration in many, many different ways across boards, shared offices, and different jurisdictional units. One of the pieces that makes this a challenge is especially for states that administer elections at the township or city level, that increases the number. So what we have are about, we think, 8,000 to 10,000 jurisdictions responsible for administering elections in the US. It's sometimes called a complex tapestry or a crazy quilt, depending on your perspective. But what that means is we have a lot of local government public servants administering elections, often alongside a number of other duties. Now, as jurisdictions become larger, these become specialized tasks, they become departments, and they have more resources. But at the small level, and I assume we find this in a lot of communities in the West, the clerk is also doing a number of other duties throughout the year. And so this shared role is complex, competing priorities at times. One of the other important pieces is that in the US, are covered by 8% of districts. So that means that a lot of very large urban districts serve the bulk of the voters, but at the same time, we have many, many jurisdictions that serve smaller numbers, but still really important. And why that matters in these conversations often comes down to what shows up in headlines or what shows up in concerns about appearances around election administration. When we have that many jurisdictions, sometimes these pieces can become different stories. What I want to share in the survey as well, this is a multi-university team. We're fortunate to partner with Fresno State, University of Florida, University of Missouri, and this has been funded through grants from the Election Trust Initiative and Democracy Fund, which are both foundations that support research on democracy in the US. We appreciate the responses from clerks and registrars here. And we're fortunate that in many ways the success of the survey has been through building relationships with state associations, the National Conference of State Legislature, and other groups that connect us to the clerks. Another part of the story I'll share today too is I had an opportunity last year with my team to interview 60 offices around the US, particularly on budget and staffing dynamics. So I'll share that. So as an overview, what I'll share with you today are sort of how are folks doing? What's the experience of running elections? What are the organizational challenges? And then I'll close with a little bit on some of the policy challenges, some of the emerging changes in legislatures, and also some of the outside pressures that local election offices are facing. So who are local election officials in the US? The first research on local election offices started after the passage of the Help America Votes Act. So in 2004 to 2006, the Congressional Research Service was really curious, who is out there doing this work? We restarted that work in 2018, and if I were to randomly pick a local election official in the United States, she would most likely be in her 50s to 60s, making about $50,000 to $60,000 with a college degree, and predominantly white, but that's in part because of how we draw the jurisdictions in the US. Why this matters is that we've seen what is really a heavily skewed workforce, 90% are women, and as the nature of the work has shifted, it's created new pressures, and wages have not necessarily always kept up with those increased pressures. That shows up in our job satisfaction numbers. Starting in 2020, we started asking local election officials to work. 2020 is an odd year to start a survey question just because I think a lot of us were running on adrenaline, and we were either in the best of times or the worst of times, depending on how you got the survey in front of me. But what we see is generally high job satisfaction. It's come down from that adrenaline moment. And here in Nevada, we hear similarly some challenges as well. I think I share here that 1 out of 5 report being satisfied. The 3 how to draw generalizations, but 3 of the 5 were neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. So thinking in the Nevada context, a little bit more muted than we see that support for, or the enthusiasm around job satisfaction across the US. One of the other challenges when you ask about job satisfaction, a lot of folks will always say, I'm fine. And then you have to probe a little bit. And so we asked some follow-up questions, and there's a couple here that I just want to call out. The top line, the blue one, is this question, I'm proud to tell people what I do for my work. In my interviews, this has been, especially in jurisdictions with some conflict and contention around elections, it's increasingly been the case that they no longer say they work in elections. They may say, I identify as working in the county, or I just work for local government, but they're careful about saying what they do in the checkout line at the grocery store or at a PTA meeting. And that's continued to be a challenge over time. Balancing work and home priorities continues to decline. Election season is an intense period. Folks, because where maybe a decade ago, that was not the case. And the last question, it's sort of a unique one. We ask, would you encourage your own child to go into this work? And that's what's really dropped off in the past 4 years. And that's an effort to ask a question that's a little more grounded in your own personal experience. Is this something you think you should continue doing? It's interesting in elections, we do often see multi-generational local election officials and their staff and poll workers, right? Especially in the poll worker side where you see grandparents, their children and their children all volunteering or serving in elections. So there is some importance here. Folks are saying, I would not encourage the next generation to continue doing this in my family. this peak and flow, sort of the high points and low points of election season are really important. What this slide's sharing is that for the smallest jurisdictions, and so here's where you have a clerk who's doing many, many duties outside of just elections, the proportion of their day that must be dedicated to elections during election season goes up 10 times almost during election season. Now, that might be something they're able to cope with around sort of staying later at the office, pulling other staff in. But what's important here is that there is this flashiness that jumps up and down. And even in large jurisdictions, that blue line, during election season, they're basically seeing an increase in effort of 50%. So what we've seen across the U.S. is election seasons become a year-round, every year activity in many ways. And when we get to the actual win, so how they make that work. In the interviews, I often hear that it is a personal sacrifice. The local clerk or chief or registrar and their deputies stay weeks. And that may be okay for a while. We raise questions in the research about how sustainable is that going to fuel turnover, which I'll turn to here in a second. This data is shifting. We're also really interested in the challenge around hiring staff in offices. Past 4 years has had some really interesting labor market dynamics in the U.S. It's been a tight labor market. It's hard to find hires. And so it's been difficult. I will say anecdotally in the past year, I've heard from a lot of offices that this is easing. The job market hiring perspective is getting easier. There's more candidates. For the past few years, 2/3 of sharing, it's been harder and harder to identify candidates that are qualified that they can hire. And some of the barriers around this is the lack of experience, though when I speak with officials, they're okay with that. They're happy to do on-the-job training. They know how to mentor and help folks shadow through the process. Really, the key challenge here are missing soft skills in many ways. So finding people who can be a good member of the team, who can work well with the public, who appreciate the importance of this work. You're essentially enabling the ability for folks to vote. And so it's not just a simple clerical task, but really engaging democracy. It has a constitutional role. Some of the challenges too have been the rate and pace of change on the both legislative and rulemaking side. I have some quotes in here that are from interviews that I've conducted with the local election officials. And really the sort of call for, we appreciate the expansion of access to voting, but it hasn't come with resources necessarily to compensate myself or my staff to make it happen. And I will note very often when I'm speaking with the head of these offices, they are deferring to their staff. They would rather pay their staff more. They're not so concerned about their pay, but it's how to keep their staff engaged and fairly compensated through those increasing challenges. Separation, I think there's been a lot of press about the rate of turnover in election offices. So thinking about the head of these offices, we ask in the survey about retirement plans. And so of all of the individuals that serve in this role in the US, over 40% are eligible to retire right now. So there's an opportunity for them to depart. And they're expressing interest to do it before the next presidential election. And so we know that there's this huge pressure for turnover. This is captured, issue 1 just put this report out about 2 weeks ago. And they went through the Western states looking at official records, press releases, and news stories about turnover at the local office. And so you can see here in Nevada, Utah, Arizona, very, very high rates of turnover. Essentially, we've seen a change. There's a link here for the story. One piece I do want to caution is we do have this turnover happening. We want to be careful about the loss of institutional knowledge or the reasons. That first slide I showed you with the demographics of local election officials, it is an older population. And so naturally, retirement is on the horizon. And so I like to buttress that observation that we do have very high rates of turnover at the moment, and we need to be very cautious about that. But I'm also thankful that those that are coming in to fill those positions also have deep experience. So the good news in many ways is that there is a bench that we're drawing from for replacing these individuals. Often it's the deputy or it's someone else within the organization. So we still see that experience, but change can be difficult in these organizations, especially if it's timed within an election cycle that can sort of knock folks off their feet a little bit. So that's the experience of the individuals. Let's talk a little bit about the budgets and funding. What we overall share is there's been a challenge across the U.S. that we have what I've been calling the COVID hangover between the CARES Act and the Recovery Plan Act dollars. A lot of states and counties, for whatever reasons, different reasons in each place, sort of assume that funding might still continue somehow. And so as that has trickled off, there's been cuts in offices and challenges in acquisitions. We've been asking about what prioritized investments would be if you had a unencumbered funding source that you could rely on. What would you utilize it on? Largely, we hear a couple of big categories. Physical space is one of the biggest ones. This is in particularly the case where I talk to jurisdictions that have shifted from predominantly in-person voting to either vote by mail or early voting. The record-keeping requirements, the looking for more professional development and training opportunities has also been a challenge, especially for smaller offices. Smaller jurisdictions may not have either the budget or just the workforce to release somebody to go to a training, and so that continues to be a challenge. New equipment has been a bright spot. I think we've been fortunate coming out of those periods of both federal stimulus and state support. Funding for equipment has been a good thing. Now it's the people side of the equation that's been a challenge. And just to give you a sense overall, if they had an opportunity to spend their money, almost a third are looking at the building and refurbishment, and then the rest are on those people side of things, whether it's the training or increasing staffing. And this is a shift from about a decade ago where we really at the national level, we were focusing on modernizing equipment. Now it's this component about catching up on the human side of things. And these are in the slides for you if you're curious, thinking about how each jurisdiction experiences. What I'll just say overall is it does vary a bit. Larger jurisdictions, though, are really focused on the infrastructure, the building piece. Smaller jurisdictions are focused on the staffing side. That's the difference you'll see between the size. And when I say size, this is measured in total registered voters by jurisdiction. And under 5,000 voters, under 15,000 voters, that's going to be more on the staffing side. Those larger 250,000, 100,000 voters on the infrastructure side. So this is a national view, and so I'll note that as we come into talking about how things work in Nevada, and I probably will have it wrong when it comes to state specifics, we have a real interesting mix across the U.S. how we administer and pay for elections. Local taxes, county level finances tend to be the predominant source, but we do have a diverse mix. Some states employ various reimbursement mechanisms, whether it's from the state or from other jurisdictions. Sometimes there's a dedicated, in some states, a dedicated tax solely for election administration at the local level. Predominantly here in the West, we do see county property tax revenues are generally the driver for supporting election administration. And depending on the state's property tax system, that can have some limitations, especially during periods of change in the real estate market, or if there's constitutional limits on how property taxes are raised. So there's these four key areas, and I would say overall reimbursements and taxes are the key ones. In the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen a lot of grant movement, both from the private philanthropic side, but then also federal grants are changing right now as well. There are some fees, some offices are able to administer other programs to help support elections. In an office that may have recording duties or assessment duties, sometimes that side of the house is able to help offset costs. That can have some challenges if you have a downturn in the rate of filings in a jurisdiction. That might reduce the amount of revenue available. In dedicated election offices in large jurisdictions, though, it's predominantly going to be coming from that county's general fund, whatever those appropriations are locally. I'm going to share really quickly just some sense of the diversity of this. We see that there are about 20% of the jurisdictions do share that there is some local dedicated tax. Most are relying on local tax in general, and then some small portion on state appropriations. Reimbursement from local jurisdictions is a mixed story. In some cases, it's automatically allowed, and jurisdictions are working with cities, special districts, and so on to calculate those. Some states, it's divided up where the cities don't have to reimburse, but special districts do, and so those mixed stories can often cause some challenges. Where state reimbursement is part of the equation, we've been hearing increasingly some negotiating has been happening about what's an allowable cost, and some downward pressure sometimes on local agencies where they're not being allowed to fully include all the costs of elections. One of the other is what I call this mixed authority challenge for election offices. So I understand here in Nevada, we've got 2 of these cases here, right? We have a county commission board system that has an executive that then selects an election director or registrar. And then you also have elected constitutional officers serving in this role. This is not uncommon in the West. Usually larger urban jurisdictions will have either home rule or some other sort of structure that has the elections office part of the executive operations. where rural counties have that broken out as a clerk's role or an elected constitutional officer. The reason this matters in the budget context is when it comes to budget season, where you sit matters in terms of advocating for investments. Sometimes those clerks, because they're independent, those professional officers that are in the executive have more opportunity to get into the process earlier on or have advocacy throughout the jurisdiction. So we pay attention to this because that can influence sort of how local finance is able to make choices around increased needs for local elections. I mentioned this earlier, one of the headwinds right now is what's happening at the federal level. Part of this is, I really think that a number of different reasons, local jurisdictions were able to really aggressively manage both the CARES Act and ARPA funds to stretch that over a long time period, but it ended at some point. I think there was some unpredictability about when those funds would run out, and that caught some jurisdictions flat-footed, especially around staffing. So I know in some jurisdictions, not here in Nevada I'm aware of, but in the West where cuts are happening now, come home to roost. The Help America Vote Act grant programs have shifted. That's sort of a moving target at the moment, though I know the most recent budget out of DC has increased that funding, though I haven't heard exactly on how the details are for distributions to the states. Some states also have some conflict between the state and local offices around how to share those funds. I haven't heard that where I'm sitting here today, but I just note that across the US, that's not always a given that those funds are available. And then, as I mentioned, the reimbursement rates have been up for negotiation in some places. And the question is often around in states where you have many multiple elections. I feel fortunate where I sit, and I believe it's the same here in Nevada. We have a pretty nice election calendar. I just speak with colleagues in the southeast of the US, and they don't really know. They may be doing 12 elections, 15 elections a year. It really depends because each of those locals can call elections as they want, and those are administered then by the county. I don't envy that problem, not knowing when and how often you'll be running elections. The Have a Challenge I mentioned, this has been primarily, I hear, in the Midwest in the US. What is the way to pass these funds through the Help America Vote Act grant funds? Some states are holding on to that for modernization of state level activities, and locals are asking for more of that if possible. This often shows up around voter registration systems, which I know were updated here in Nevada. And that's often a point of contention on how to share those funds. The other challenge, this comes up at the county level. Counties are mandated potentially to, this is really negotiated. Generally, we see that there is an advantage to some degree on the elected side of things if there's a strong relationship between that elected clerk and their county commission. But if an election director sits in the right part of the county government, they also can be very effective. Magic wand to say how this could work better, but it comes down to relationships. And one great example we heard from North Carolina was that in North Carolina, the counties have a leadership development program that's run through the state. And that's just an opportunity for the heads of parks, elections, transportation to take this course together, and they build relationships to be better public servants in their work, but they also then have new connections. So when budget season comes around, those conversations are a lot easier. We've also heard about clerks moving into county boards and governance roles there. And of course, they carry those policy priorities with them. The other unfortunate challenge for election offices, you don't really know necessarily how much an election will cost in advance. So I hear from a lot of offices that they're constantly either in a surplus or a deficit just because voter turnout is maybe the biggest driver. Back to their local budget committees, there's a little extra scrutiny. Well, you were way over last time, you're way under, for reasons that are largely out of their control compared to some of their peers in other county government, where the amount of road construction might be fixed, law enforcement costs are largely fixed, they sort of can predict these demands. Election costs can really vary widely, and then that causes a challenge when you come in to talk about how to ask for more funds. Some innovations that are out there, and actually Nevada is included in this. The Center for Election Innovation and Research recently wrote a report on the different funding structures that are in the US. Sharing statewide costs is one of the emerging trends. So whether that's sharing in postage costs, printing of envelopes and ballots, using state funds to help local agencies, that's been a key bright spot to help out in local jurisdictions. Another piece that we've heard can't afford to buy large pieces of equipment, the state purchases that and leases it back to the county. And that way it allows for the counties to make choices between whether they're making capital expenses or other expenses, some flexibility in their opportunities. 6 or 7 states have also increased their statewide funding, Colorado, Minnesota, and Washington in particular, largely driven by calls from their state association of local clerks asking for more compensation for the state portion of the ballot, essentially a reimbursement request as they've seen an increase in changes. Now, I called out states that have more vote by mail at the moment, so some of those transitions too are part of that driver as well. And let me just close with a couple of pieces here. These survey questions are a little bit of an opportunity for the local election officials to share their concerns about the legislative process, so don't shoot the messenger, and this is national. One of the first requests, this has been up everywhere. And in many cases, for good reason, things have been changing and parties, the press, researchers like myself are trying to learn more about how election administration is happening. But I had an opportunity to speak with a clerk, and she had on her desk the previous year's open records request and this year's, and it was physically a stack 4 times taller. And that's been falling largely to those clerks or local election officials to wrestle with. Many don't necessarily have counsel or county lawyers to assist in those decisions, and they feel personally responsible and legally liable to make sure they do that work right. There is a sense that these might be what we're calling unduly burdensome. What I mean by that is there are some requests that are clearly not fitting the context. So I'll pick on my state in Oregon. We've been hearing from clerks that are getting open record requests about polling places. We haven't had polling places since 2001. So clearly these are open records requests that are not really aware of what they're looking for. And there's a concern that this is an effort to sort of slow down or just create more challenges within the offices. But I will say, we follow up with a question asking what you would do to fix this. Local officials clearly want to keep public records requests part of the democratic process. So they don't want to, we suggested a bunch of different policy responses about limiting or fining requesters. They're not interested in that. They would rather continue to have that open door for sharing data, sharing information about how elections are run. They just need help on standardizing the procedures or staff to make that work. 72% of our sample share that there's been some new legislation in their state since 2022, and only about a quarter share that it's helped. This is something we hear both in Democrat and Republican majority states, and so both sides are working to change election rules in different ways, and it's creating some stress. I hear, and this is the quote here, a desire to have an open invitation for members of the legislature to come and sit in the election process and see how some of those impacts are. But this rate and pace of change has been a source of concern across election offices. And let me just close with this. It was one of my favorite quotes, and I hear this in a lot of my interviews. The individuals who serve as clerks, registrars, assessors, whatever the name of that role is, are really in this for democracy. It's a public service motivation that brings them there. Sometimes it's even a multi-generational one. They are personally invested in making sure voters have a right and that exercise their rights and have access to voting. It's a personal sacrifice, but it's clearly motivated by a desire to be part of something bigger than themselves. And so despite all of these headwinds and pressures, they continue to do this work for something more than just themselves. And it's always been an honor when I have a chance to sit with election officials and hear their stories as they go through these challenges. Looking ahead, we're just mindful of these challenges around budget needs as we see declining federal resources potentially. Macroeconomic concerns if state finances or sales tax or income tax, and some more research is needed to understand sort of the real budgetary dynamics on how counties make decisions around this. And I'll close with that as a thanks to my team and support of our funders. And we've shared a link here in the QR code to the survey documents. So if there are those of you who enjoy looking at survey methodology at night with your loved ones, there's your opportunity. But we also have some policy summaries there as well. And I'm happy to take any questions too at this point.
Thank you so much for your very informative presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Vice Chair.
Dr. Manson, thank you so much for the presentation. A couple of quick questions with the chair's indulgence. You mentioned the difference between the dedicated election offices versus other election offices that have recording and assessment duties. Are you finding a difference in the problem with turnover, the problem with job satisfaction? Is it consistent between both kinds of offices? Is there less dissatisfaction, less turnover in the dedicated election offices?
So it's a great question, and thank you. There's what I've been calling this sort of U-shaped problem, and what I mean by that is when we look at the very large jurisdictions, urban areas, and the very small rural, maybe under 10,000 voters, those are two different worlds, but they tend to have the resources to sort of get around the challenge. It's these transition counties in between that are making the next move up. They're growing populations. They may have been rural moving to suburban or suburban moving to larger. And that's where some of those resource constraints really start to become a challenge. The dedicated offices, government have often been able to advocate for resources alongside other divisions or departments within the county, differently than a clerk who's elected outside, who then enters the budget process later when the county executive's already set some priorities broadly. So that can be the budgetary dynamic there as well. On the job satisfaction piece, what's interesting is I think that the job satisfaction on those elected officials is higher. The motivations to sort of run for office and serve bring something different. And so even if they're facing challenges, they tend to report higher job satisfaction than their appointed or hired colleagues or counterparts in other jurisdictions. And I think that might be a feature of sort of where they sit within the county governance structure.
Thank you, Dr. Manson. Brief follow-up, Chair.
Yeah.
Dr. Manson, are you noticing any trend nationally in terms of whether election offices are being made dedicated offices versus the ones that have the assessor duties, the recorder duties, and are trying to be jacks of all different trades? Are you noticing any trend nationally happening?
No, not at the moment. And largely, if that change occurs, it's because the county has decided and started to get into sort of the.
Sorry, can you state your name for the record each time?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please,
Yes.
no worries. Thank you so much.
So, Paul Manson, the change that would occur for that transition would be home rule largely. And so what we haven't seen in the 70s, there was a spate of home rule transition in counties, and that was a movement at the time. We haven't had that happen recently. If we saw an increase where counties started thinking more about home rule options where they're allowed to, then those positions would transition out of doing everything. And it is amazing. I think Michigan and Wisconsin are the interesting case here because their election officials are also doing meeting minutes. They might be doing HR, payroll, administering cemetery plots, and so on. They have these really diverse sets of duties, but it tends to be on the more rural side.
Thank you, Dr. Manson. Thank you, Chair.
I have a quick question. On the slide that was talking about how workers don't necessarily want to say that they work in elections, that they work for the county or things like that. Did you find that it was due to safety concerns about why they didn't necessarily want to say what they do?
Sure. So Paul Manson again. Yes, it is largely a safety concern. It's not in the survey as much as in the interviews. So in addition to the 60 interviews, we had another 30 in the year prior. I want to say that in those interviews, probably 2 out of 5 interviews, we had to pause because it got too emotional at that question. So we'd have to stop the recording, stop the interview, let folks recollect themselves. There's really a sense of a loss. I close civic duty and public service motivation, and that's sort of been taken away for individuals that no longer feel safe to say what they do. And that goes hand in hand with some challenges too, we know, on the physical safety side of things. Again, noting that counties are paying the bill for a lot of these changes, we've heard conflict around what physical safety improvements are being allowed or not allowed in the budget process. But it is largely around the sort of intimidation or sharing what you do in the checkout line might turn into a more extended or conflict-based engagement. And we've heard this also with poll workers as well. Poll workers who do tend to be older, their spouse may be concerned that their spouse continues to do the poll worker job, and they say, hey, do you really want to do this? Is this a thing that you feel is safe enough to do?
Wow, thank you for that. I know it's definitely something that we've been talking about here, about making sure that everyone is safe, especially our workers. So thank you for that. Our next question comes from Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for this great overview. I think this is really timely with what is about to occur here in Nevada in the month of March. I appreciate it. My colleagues asked some great questions. So actually, my last question was a more question for us. I'm not sure if it's to research, to our LCB staff or to who, but I know that we passed a bill last session to make sure that our county employees could get a raise, including our election workers. So just wanted to know how that was going and if that's helping with the issues that we see nationally here locally.
Did you want to?
I'm not sure. I think that might be for the staff.
Yeah. So we do have Washoe and Clark registrars here, so we could follow up and ask them on the record as well. Good, great question. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for the report. Really appreciate it. And it's terrible that our election officials feel that way, right? That they're safe. I mean, it's something that we all need to work together, whether you're on the legislate, on this body, or you're just part of the general public, to really support those people. I wanted to know that a lot of the speculation and conspiracy seem to grow the further away we get from election day, right? As additional ballots come in and then things change and there's a lot of speculation there. Do you have any insights on that, especially as how Nevada compares to other states?
Thanks, Senator. Paul Mance again. So if I understand your question, it's thinking about the immediate period around Election Day and after, or a year later?
No, the days that follow. For instance, the presidential election, when everybody is waiting on Nevada to give their results, and it's so much later than so many of the other states, and you just see the social media buzz about what's happening in Nevada and unfair abuse that some of our people get. But I wanted to see if you had any insights on that.
Though this has been, I think, a challenge for.
Please state your name again.
Paul
Thank
Manson.
you. No worries.
So, in the last election cycle, a lot of local offices and folks doing research in this field were trying hard to do voter education that election day is not election result day. And so part of this is some shifting expectations or seeing if we can. Obviously, in elections that have very clear outcomes, wide margins, we can declare winners earlier. And the public has become used to that. And with some of these changes in how we get to vote, that's also moved that. So my sense with that is the more work that we can do on that voter education piece is really critical. So just reminding both the press and voters that election day is an important day. It means, that's when the ballots are done being cast. But counting and tabulating historically in the U.S. has taken a long time. We've been fortunate for the past generation in sort of the internet and new media era that this is sped up, but we're in some ways coming back to what we traditionally experienced. And so I think part of the challenge has been exactly that. As we look across the U.S., these different rates, the 2 congressional races in California last year that was a month before a result was released. Unfortunately, I think a lot of those challenges might come from when we have legislative activity or rules at the state level that cause some changes in an election cycle and that cause those delays. I think a lot of us are sort of holding our breath what some of these redistricting maps might do to create some delays as we make sure things are done correctly. But I think that's the message that we've been sharing both within the research and practitioner communities. Get the word out that election day isn't the result day necessarily. Tabulation is being done carefully, securely. It requires time. We've expanded the opportunities for voters to cast their ballot with a postmark. They have an opportunity to cure any errors, right? This is all about voter access and inclusion. There might be a little bit of a trade-off that we don't have election night results, but that's okay. That's not always been the case in the U.S. even.
Have you found that beyond the education portion, though, that policy can influence some of that? So at least from afar, we see Florida really seem to come out pretty quickly and clean, right? With a much larger, electoral base. And have you found that state policy leans into some of that?
So this is Paul Manson. State policy does. I think the big difference comparing Florida, especially to states in the West, is voter turnout as a proportion of who is eligible to vote is much lower in Florida. And that's in part because many of the jurisdictions in the West have done more work for voter registration. So there's more ballots, there's more ways to vote. My colleagues in Florida do really enjoy being at the front of the line, and we always have a friendly little jab back and forth on that. But their system does have overall sort of lower voter engagement. And that's, I think, a really good example here that you can have quicker results in exchange for reducing voter access, or you can increase voter access and have to have a little bit longer time to get full results, at least on that evening. That's the trade-off, that's a challenge. And so different policy and legislative priorities can adjust both those levers back and forth and make that trade-off, whether it's things like postmark choices, what counts for accepting the ballots, what's the curing process. All of those are tools that could change if the policy priority is to have a result on election night, or if it's to increase overall voter turnout.
Thank you, Chair. I believe there's a balance there that we need to strive for, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Senator Daly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and more of a just a comment on the one question that our colleague from the South asked regarding county pay. So we did pass that bill last session. I believe it was Senate Bill 116, but I'm not sure, Madam Chair, that Clark or Washoe County will have anything necessarily to add to that, because they were straight up county employees, so their salaries and rates were set by the county commission, and they're not elected. In the other 15 jurisdictions, counties in the state, the clerks were responsible for that. They all got an increase in pay, and they all are making 3% more than their highest paid subordinate. So we're hoping that will have a positive impact on retention and hopefully recruiting people to run for those offices, because I know that was an issue before. So the only thing I can tell you on that, to answer the question on has it had any impact, I haven't heard any complaints. So I think it did have a positive impact.
Thank you. We're going to go to Vice Chair Orenshaw and then Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your indulgence. During the 2023 Nevada Legislature, our Secretary of State pushed a bill, Senate Bill 406, that made it a felony to threaten, intimidate, harass election workers. And I'm just wondering if the research you've done has looked at states that might have, like Nevada and other states that might have passed similar laws, to see if that has tried to maybe have an effect of stopping this turnover, this lack of satisfaction, this, as my colleague, Assemblymember Mosca mentioned, the one slide that talks about election workers who don't want to tell others what they do. Do you think laws like that have had any effect in trying to help in terms of recruiting election workers, keeping election workers?
Thank you, Senator Paul Manson. We haven't asked that specifically, so I want to be careful. I don't have data in my findings to say. I think if I had a magic wand, I'd know states that have adopted those sorts of laws, and we'd see some sort of change over time in job satisfaction. What I will say anecdotally is I know that those sorts of changes, I think, strengthen relationships between election officers and law enforcement, which prior to 2020 was still sort of an emerging relationship. And so that can be helpful, but I don't have anything empirically I can say that supports one way or the other.
Thank you. Brief follow-up, Chair?
Yes.
Do you think that's something you and your center might study in the future in terms of looking at states that have adopted those laws that toughen penalties?
Paul Manson. So actually, what I like about this is we're going to be running the survey again this summer for 2026. I think we've got a survey question from you. So I'm happy to ask on the survey, to what degree do these sorts of penalties or protections make you feel more comfortable or make your staff feel more comfortable? It'd be a great question for us to add.
I'll be very interested in the outcome. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Manson.
Of course. Does anybody have any final questions? All right. Thank you so much for your time and your presentation. As someone who's getting their PhD, I love research and surveys and interviews, and I appreciate the additional commentary about some of the methods and comments that you went through with the research. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Now we will hear from Adam Cook, who is a policy associate with the National Conference of State Legislatures, or otherwise known as NCSL, on state laws concerning the use of AI, artificial intelligence, in elections and election administration. Mr. Cook, please proceed when you're ready.
just wondering, are the slides up here? All right, well, thank you to the chair and the members of the committee for having me here today. As was just said, my name is Adam Kokok, and I'm a policy associate with the Elections and Redistricting Program at the National Conference of State Legislatures. For those of you who are not familiar with NCSL, we are the nation's nonpartisan organization supporting the work of both legislators and legislative staff throughout the 50 states, DC, and the territories. NCSL provides a number of services, but you could say our bread and butter is our nonpartisan research and analysis, and any requests for information are handled on a confidential basis. So if you have any questions about elections or any other policy topic under the sun, please reach out to myself or anybody else at NCSL at any time. So today I'll be giving an overview of AI and election laws. So this is going to include laws on AI and campaigning, and then I will be putting these laws into context of a recent case in California. And then I will also briefly be going over election administrators and their use of AI. So I just wanted to begin by putting us on the same page. So when we're talking about deepfakes today, we are specifically talking about deepfakes used in the context of campaigning and usually in a deceptive way. So in a way to try to deceive somebody or trick them. Deepfake, put simply, is an image created by an AI that is photorealistic. So some of the common deepfake tools you may have heard of are Midjourney or OpenAI's Sora. And then also, I just wanted to clarify that for this first part, we're going to be talking about laws in campaigning, laws in election administration. We will be covering in a little while. I also wanted to just point you to a handful of databases on deepfakes. There's a handful of organizations out there that have been keeping track of how deepfakes have been used in a political context. Some of these databases look at the US, but many of them look at the world generally, so other countries. All right, so first a little history. Back in 2018, deepfakes were just starting to emerge. The technology was nowhere near as advanced as it was today, and consumer end products were not very widely available. As a result, only 2 states had enacted laws in 2018. The nation's first were California and Texas. Then fast forwarding to the end of 2022, generative AI tools made huge advancements, bringing AI directly into the public eye. Over the next year in 2023, we saw 3 more states enact laws. Those were Washington, Minnesota, and Michigan. Then in 2024, with the presidential election quickly approaching, we saw 15 additional states enact laws. And then today, here in 2026, we are aware of 26 states that have enacted a law on deepfakes and elections. Now, there are several other states that have deepfake laws on the books, like Pennsylvania. However, these laws are broader than elections and do not mention candidates or anything in the elections process specifically, but these laws would likely apply in those contexts. Now, there have been 2 main approaches to regulating deepfakes in campaigns. These are prohibitions and disclosures. So starting with the less common one, prohibitions, 2 states, Minnesota and Texas, they prohibit the publication of an election-related deepfake a certain number of days prior to an election. So in Texas, this is 30 days before the election, and in Minnesota, this is 90 days. The other 24 states with laws on this subject have some type of disclosure requirement. These disclosures are similar to those that are found on campaign finance disclosures, and they appear in a form such as this media has been generated by AI, and it's usually printed or stated on the media. Now, many states that have a disclosure requirement also have some sort of prohibition on deepfakes, although this prohibition does not apply so long as the disclosure statement is present. Now, there are also a handful of other approaches that states have tried to take. One is digitally embedded disclosures. So in Colorado and Utah, in addition to the disclosure requirement that's required to be printed on a deepfake, they also require certain disclosure information to be included in the metadata of the deepfake as well. So the metadata is the descriptive data of the file. So this includes who made it, when it was made, what type of tool was used to create the file. And then in California, they also have their own provision that requires online platforms to create guidelines for dealing with deepfakes related in campaigns and elections. They also have provision that requires these social media companies to intake concerns and complaints from election officials who identify deepfakes talking about the election. Now, enforcement has been a big topic with these laws. States have taken both civil and criminal remedies. So by far, the most common civil remedy is providing for injunctive relief, which allows a depicted individual to request a deepfake to be taken down and no longer circulated. Another fairly common civil remedy is giving individuals a cause of action to sue. This is often limited to just candidates. However, there are states that expand this cause of action to other individuals who may have been depicted. And then there are also civil fines. So most states have a flat fee, like New Mexico, which has a $1,000 penalty for each violation. But then there's also Colorado that has taken a different approach where the fine scales with the dollar amount spent to promote the deepfake. Then there are also criminal penalties. So there are criminal fines across the nation. These range anywhere between $500 and $10,000. And then there's also prison time that can be imposed. So some states have a fairly standard maximum of X amount of years per violation, as is the case in Texas. Mississippi has a different provision which allows for a maximum of 5 years if the use of the deepfake was intended to incite violence. Now, there are certain exemptions for entities. The most common is exempting deepfakes used for the purpose of satire and parody. And the other exemption is usually for republished deepfakes by the media to be able to discuss a story. Now, many states have these exemptions, but as we'll see in a moment, not all states have these exemptions or have constructed them in a particular way that has led them to court. So there have been a couple of court cases involving these state laws. The first that we saw was in 2024 out of Minnesota. This is Coles v. Ellison. And this case is currently still ongoing. It's in the U.S. 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and it's overstanding. The other two cases, however, those have been decided. The most recently decided case was the Babylon v. Lopez case. It was decided earlier this month, and their law, the Hawaii's law, which is where this case came out of, was permanently enjoined. Now, we won't be covering this case in depth today, but just know that the holdings and reasoning in this case were very similar to the California case, which brings us to Coles v. Bonta. So Coles v. Bonta centered around a content creator on YouTube who was creating parody deepfakes of presidential candidates during the 2024 election. He claimed that California's law restricted his First Amendment right to free speech to create parody. The court in California ultimately agreed and granted a preliminary injunction on the case while the case played out. This was decided back in August, so the court found that California's law violated the First Amendment based on the content, viewpoint, and the speaker of the political speech. The court found that the law had failed strict scrutiny. This is the highest standard to meet and is a type of judicial review that evaluates the constitutionality of an action and looks at the burden that the action has on an individual's rights. And in this context, it was the First Amendment. The court determined that California's law could still meet its goals of protecting the election if they had a less restrictive law. They also found that the law was unconstitutionally vague and violated the 14th Amendment. As a result, the court ended up putting a permanent injunction on the entirety of the law, making it inoperable. Something important to note about this case and the case in Hawaii is that these came out of U.S. district courts. So these rulings, so in the case of Hawaii and this case in California, they only apply to those states. So while other states' laws aren't directly affected, we can possibly learn something about what sorts of arguments may arise in other states if cases are brought against them. And we can also learn a little bit more about the differences in other states' laws that may protect them if they are brought to court. So as I said earlier, these laws are broadly speaking regulating the use of deepfakes in elections and campaigns, but the specific use cases that are regulated depend on the state. So in California, the law prohibited any speech that is reasonably likely to harm a candidate and their electoral prospects. The court took issue with this as it was not regulating an actual harm, as electoral prospects are hard to measure, and what constitutes as a harm to electoral prospects is not defined in California's state law. And the court found that as also overly vague. The court said that one possible way to remedy this was to only restrict deepfakes that cause concrete harms like voter interference, coercion, or intimidation. So as for what other states are doing, first, some states have similar provisions regulating the likely harm to electoral prospects. Alabama is one of those, as just an example. And then on the other hand, some states do not require any harm to be done specifically. Colorado prohibits depictions of a candidate doing something they did not actually do, whether it caused harm or not. So let's move on to satire and parody provisions. So that was kind of what was at the core of this case. California's law required satire and parody deepfakes to include a disclaimer statement. Now, this disclaimer was separate from the disclaimer for other political deepfakes. This disclosure requirement had to state at the bottom of a deepfake that it was for the purposes of satire or parody. The court stated that this disclaimer was overly burdensome and drowned out the message of the satire. Additionally, the court said that the law was unconstitutional as parody and satire was not protected if it was reasonably likely to deceive someone absent the AI disclaimer. Now, most states are unlikely to run into similar issues with their laws as they provide broad exemptions in their provisions. However, as stated, Hawaii also ended up falling into a court case. They did not have any sort of exemption in their law, as California had this safe harbor for parody and satire if they included the disclaimer. Hawaii just did not mention anything for parody and satire in their statute. There are other states, however, that do stay silent on satire and parody. Indiana, for example, carves out no exemption from their disclosure requirement, although the state does not strictly prohibit deepfakes without the standard AI disclaimer. They simply require a disclaimer to avoid being sued by a candidate. And then finally, we'll talk about causes of action in this case. California allowed nearly anyone to sue under their law by allowing viewers of deceptive media to take action. The court found that this provision was overly broad. They said that one potential remedy was to only allow candidates that had suffered concrete harms to sue. This is another thing that's fairly unique to California. Most states allow only candidates, government officials, or political parties who have been harmed to sue. Outside of this, if states are going to give a cause to action to lay people, they're only going to allow those who were depicted in a deepfake to do so. So moving on to AI and election administration. So most of the bills that have been out of the states have been focused on AI in campaigning specifically. There hasn't been a whole lot on AI and election administration. However, there have been a couple that we've seen over the last several years. So in Arizona, they introduced legislation that prohibited the use of AI in election equipment. So think of signature verification tools, polling equipment, those sorts of things. Maryland also had a bill, I believe it was last year, that prohibited AI from being the sole thing translating election materials. So this would include things like ballots and pamphlets, or any sort of voter outreach material. They would have required some sort of human to be involved. The bill was enacted, however, that specific provision regulating AI was removed from the bill before it was finally passed. With that being said, at NCSL, we have done some recent research on how election administrators have been using AI and their thoughts on the technology that I hope may be somewhat informative to the committee. So most of the uses by administrators has been similar to how many people have been using AI in other sectors. So drafting text is by far one of the most common uses we've heard of. So this can include just drafting regular emails, but it also includes drafting voter outreach materials that they may mail out to people. Something a little more specific to elections, however, is that we've heard from a handful of administrators who are using or exploring the use of AI to proof ballots. The process of ballot proofing involves ensuring that the many ballot styles an election official may have, it's ensuring that all of the candidates and races for that election are correct, ensuring that any sort of translations for other languages may be correct. And of course, this is only just an initial ballot proofing where they will then later go through by hand through these ballot styles with a human eye. Then there are also the use of RAGs, or what are known as retrieval augmented generation. So these are essentially chatbots that are trained on certain types of materials. The Ohio Secretary of State's office is an example of this. They recently released what is called EVA. It is a chatbot that is meant to help election officials with their the state's election procedural manual. Election officials oftentimes are not attorneys, and they have to go through a lot of these election procedures that use a lot of legal language, and the Ohio State Secretary of State's office has seen this chatbot as a way to help them understand any questions that administrators may have. And of course, there's also a handful of future uses that we've heard that election officials are interested in using, but we're not necessarily aware of anybody using it for these purposes right now. So, for example, flagging candidate filing forms if they are missing key information, or if there is some sort of false information, flagging those forms. And then re-precincting is another potential future use that we've heard interest in. Now, Administrators, of course, have various concerns and hesitancies about using AI. Their work is under constant scrutiny, and administrators want to ensure that elections are run well and accurately. So while many have found AI to help with certain tasks, they do still have many concerns. So first, security and privacy is quite at the top of their list. They're often dealing with very sensitive and private voter information, and giving that to a chatbot, leaks often happen, data breaches often happen. So there is some hesitancy about what sort of information they are putting into these chatbots. Consistency and accuracy is also a concern of theirs. They want to make sure that they are giving the correct information out to voters, or if they are reviewing documents, they want to make sure that that is correct. And then the legal landscape is something that they're also fairly concerned about. They are concerned with FOIA requests, what may be released. There's also questions about copyrights with the material that AI produces. And then there's also the aspect of over-reliance. Many election administrators are worried that their staff or themselves may become over-reliant on using AI, and they may end up losing certain skills or the human eye on certain processes. So, like I said, there hasn't been a whole lot of bills or legislation throughout the states on election administration and AI. However, there are a handful of things that the legislature could consider, whether the legislature is looking to either expand or restrict access to AI in these administrative offices. One area to look at is AI use policies. So AI use policies essentially tell an office when and where they may use AI. Many election administrative offices have stated that they just don't have an AI use policy, or their AI use policy is that they're just not allowed to use AI under any circumstances, even for, say, drafting emails. Another thing that could be looked at is funding. Something that we've heard from election administrators is that they often don't have funding for these tools. Often we see that election administrators are just using their own money to acquire a subscription to ChatGPT, say. And then there's also data security is another area. So whether that's looking at what sort of information an election administrator is allowed to use, or if it's looking at the companies themselves who are providing these tools and how they have to secure that data. And then one other thing that I will mention is that NCSL, we are currently working on a report that dives into election administration and AI a little bit deeper. So I'm happy to share that with the committee once it is done. But with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Committee members, do we have any questions? Carson City?
Yes, actually, no one has questions down there on this? Anyway, I have a couple of questions / comments on some of that stuff. So when you're looking at AI, is it more than just a hesitancy on the side of administrators to use AI for some of the things that you talked about? Or is there any rules or laws that have been put in place for, saying that there should be a firewall between that? Let me give an example. So in the election administration uses, just above that, voter or ballot proofing, various things, basically a more sophisticated spell check and various things. Somebody's proofing that as an individual after that and looking at it, and that can be a useful tool as far as that goes. When you start talking about, do they have access to the voter registration files? I just think that's a red flag for me. I've never been a fan of AI on that side of it. And if you listen to some of the experts on AI out there, if you watch any of the news programs and various things and the experts on that, regardless of the platform, whether it's ChatGPT or the Chinese version of AI, large language models, not that I'm an expert, just regurgitating information there. They've done experiments where they give the AI a task that's going to take them longer than that, and they say, hey, we're going to stop you on this task, we're going to shut you off at a certain time. And they found that in like a high percentage, well over 50% of the time, that the AI model used that and then said, oh, no, I can't be finished. You can't turn me off. And they start rewriting their code, hiding it in places where they can't find it, so they can't be shut off. And they go against what their direction is from the human source because they, want to continue on to their project. I just don't think it can be trusted. I mean, we all saw the movie Short Circuit, a couple decades ago, or Johnny Five is Alive, right? If you remember. I just don't think that we have enough control over that, and there should be a firewall from being a glorified spell check and then the actual voter registration data, interactions with the public, and answering any questions. I just don't think that should ever be mixed. Any comments on that? Any states that have just said, no, we're going to build a firewall here and AI cannot go past this point in the process?
Yeah, Adam Kokuk, thank you for that question, Senator. So we haven't seen any sort of legislation that's specific to elections and how administrators may use it, how administrators may use AI. Now, my focus is primarily on elections. I'm happy to, in my follow-up to the committee, reach out to some of my colleagues who work on AI a little bit more broadly, as I know that there have been some efforts in some states to regulate the use of AI in government more generally. The most that I'm aware of is that some states have created requirements to inventory any sort of use of AI amongst government offices. And so, yes, I'm happy to get back to you with some additional information on that. To address something else that you may have said, with election administrators, there are also, many of them are hesitant while they're using AI. There's also a pretty broad group also who just don't want to touch AI at all in their work. As I said, there are a lot of considerations election administrators must make. They want to make sure that the election is, accurate and that there aren't, glaring errors within their work. And this has caused many of them to just not want to touch it at all.
And follow up if I can, Madam Chair. And thank you for that. I'm just hesitant, more than hesitant. I would be actually say prohibited. You can't do it. And there is a point where you've got to rely on. We have computer programs and we've relied on that, but it's completely in-house. It's not connected to the internet to do some of the calculations and the various things that we've all come to rely on. And there's a certain amount of trust on that. We have a long history with using computers in that way. But AI moves it to a whole another generation. And the only way, I've heard the experts say, the only way you're going to be able to monitor AI to make sure AI is not doing the things we don't want AI to do is to have another AI model monitor the AI model that we want to try to control. And I'm going, the type of control you're talking about here is just not possible, just like in Jurassic Park. Anyway, That's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Does any other committee members have a question? Senator Steinbeck.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and I can't imagine what the solution would be, but foreign actors and the use of AI, and specifically how anybody is trying to address that with limited jurisdiction over those areas. And then also if you've seen any efforts of some of the platforms to identify deep fakes, whether it's parodies or not, and to put disclaimers on them automatically.
Adam Kokuk, thank you for that question. So I guess to address the first half about that, about foreign actors. So as for the use of AI and in the use of AI specifically in foreign actors, I haven't seen a whole lot of legislation surrounding this, especially on the state level. I know that there have been at least a handful of efforts in Congress looking at AI just a little more broadly in the campaigning context. Now, as for foreign actors in elections more generally, we have seen several states over the last year or so really looking at one of two things. First, there are a lot of states that have been looking at the regulation of foreign dollars into specifically ballot measure campaigns. Now, this is something that is regulated on the federal level only for candidates. However, for initiative and referendum, say, foreign dollars aren't explicitly prohibited by federal law. So we've seen a handful of states over the last handful of years trying to address this. Then on the other hand, we've also seen a lot of states over the last year introduce or enact legislation that is similar to the Federal Foreign Agents Registration Act. So this is a law that on the federal level regulates and requires disclosure from lobbyists or those acting under the influence of a foreign government, individual, or corporation who's looking to influence the political system in the U.S. So those are the two main ways we've seen states recently trying to address foreign actors in politics. I'm sorry, what was the second part?
The second part was in regards to deep fakes, some of the platforms,
right.
Whether it's the actual AI generating tools or it's platforms that are used to distribute that. Yeah. If there's any efforts for them to identify the deep fakes and put disclaimers on themselves.
Yeah. So Adam Kokuk. So as I stated, with California's law, they do have that provision that requires them to work with election administrators. Also, a part of that law does require them to proactively look out for deepfakes on their platforms. Outside of that, we have seen a handful of tools being developed by, I believe, Google and Meta that are trying to identify deepfakes that have already been generated, whether it's on their platform or not. So they're, from my understanding, I'm not a computer engineer. However, there are certain, things that you can identify a deepfake with, and they're creating these programs that are able to identify them. And then there are also, I believe it's through Adobe and their software, within the metadata of anything that is created with a deepfake, I believe through their software, it labels it as having had AI generation in it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation. Next, we are going to hear from our Clark County Register of Voters as well as our Washoe County Register of Voters on information related to compliance with federal requirements concerning accessibility in elections. Please go ahead whenever you're ready. And we're going to have Andrew McDonald from the Washoe County Register present first, and then we'll have Lorena Portillo go second from Clark County.
Good morning, Chair Gonzalez and Vice Chair Orenshall and the committee members. My name is Andrew McDonald. I am the Washoe County Registrar of Voters. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in front of you today. I'll be speaking about compliance with federal requirements for accessibility in elections. I'll kind of start first with a few slides on Title II, Americans with Disability Act, which covers state, local government entities and ensures that accessibility to the people that are going to the voting booth, if you will, have been covered with those accommodations. Physical accessibility in polling places, some of the requirements that we have to deal with is accessible routes, ensuring that accessible parking spaces are there, curbed ramps, level ramps, the entryways, doorways are wide enough for wheelchairs, and that there are no steps without a ramp. Interior wise, we have to make sure there's a clear path of travel for check-in into the voting areas, that accessible booths have the ability for a wheelchair to go underneath, and seating for voters who may not be able to stand in line for long periods of time. Regarding the polling place itself, we need to make sure that those voters, the ADA community, have the ability to vote privately and independently, mark and cast their ballot without assistance if desired, and use assistive features in the voting system such as audio ballots, tactile control, sip and puff capabilities. And to note, we cannot force the ADA community to use mail ballots. We need to provide accessibility into the voting location, the polling place. So how does effective communication or Title II work? Sign language interpreters where necessary. There is a program the Secretary of State's office has where someone can make a call through their cell phone for sign language. Providing accessible voting materials through registration. Large print materials where necessary. And accessible websites for voter information and to register. And lastly, some of the things that we do inside the site is provide clear signage at the polling locations. Title II does allow for some reasonable accommodations where it doesn't fundamentally alter the process. So for example, allowing a voter to bring the friend, family member, whoever they would like of their choice, with the exception it cannot be their employer or a union rep. Also, they allow curbside voting if getting into the building is not possible, and additional time for these ADA community members who would like to vote in person. Some of the things that we do and around the state is training of poll workers. Staff must be able to set up an accessible polling location, properly operate that equipment that is at that location, assist voters with respect, dignity, and provide non-discriminatory practices and understand the rights of the disabled community. A lot of Washoe County buildings are older, and just because they're older doesn't mean that they can't be accessible. However, we are running into various problems with that in our community due to snow, weather, the different things in Washoe County. So when that happens, we either have to close that location, we may need to move that location, provide curbside voting at that location, what I'll get to a little later in the program here, and offer absentee ballots. So how is Title II enforced? It's enforced by the Department of Justice, by private lawsuits, by affected voters that may have had a bad experience. And the DOJ actually conducts regularly accessible reviews of polling places, is what happened in Washoe County in the primary of the 2024 election, where they visited 10 of our 55 election day vote centers. And unfortunately, all 10 of those locations failed compliance for various reasons. In December of 2024, the DOJ in Washoe County entered into a voluntary settlement agreement to initiate a full-blown ADA compliant polling program. What does that agreement talk about? What does that settlement agreement go through? It's to create the accessible program, the policies and procedures that go along with it, and to train our staff, not that they haven't been trained before, but to completely train our staff, provide additional training for poll workers, to remediate our failed vote locations, and to provide reasonable accommodations to the ADA community. We had to hire an ADA expert, which we got a gentleman from the University of Reno, Nevada, a consultant there, where he comes with us to every single location and assesses those locations and assigns off on those vote centers. We also have to complete a DOJ 170-point checklist at each and every single early voting location and 55 election day locations across Washoe County. And one note here is we cannot do voting, we cannot perform voting across Washoe County without Washoe County locations or facilities ourselves, City of Reno, City of Sparks location sites, and private businesses that work alongside of us. Unfortunately, all of our vote center contracts expired at the end of the last general election in 2024. So we are starting with a very blank canvas where we're needing to find locations, we're needing to hire this expert, go through the process, create a program, and then with his help, us search, find, and assess, remediate, and sign these new contracts with these locations. As you can tell, it's quite a few locations, and right now, unfortunately, fewer than 20% of Washoe County vote centers for this upcoming 2026 election are not 100% compliant. So that is a major gap for us, and I'll get into that in a few slides. Some of the biggest things that we're having an issue with this compliancy is the parking, the slopes, the path of travel, and the asphalt cracks that we got written up with under the Department of Justice. These are very costly remediation efforts. They're infrastructure projects. They may require pavement to be ripped up and repaved over, restriping, a lot of things there that we're not able to use some of these locations because of that. We also don't have the funding or recurring funding to comply with 2026 elections. So we're having to kind of take some things into our own hands, if you will. And so when I have part in quotes up here of the solution, one of the things that we're trying to do under the reasonable modifications under the DOJ is provide curbside voting program. As I mentioned, most of these are parking and path of travel to the vote center. So we in Washoe County are working with our voting system vendor to design and engineer a mobile voting cart, which means we would be taking the vote to the person, the ADA individual, to their car. So how does it work? We will be putting a program together where an ADA voter pulls into an accessible designated parking spot. There will be signage for a phone number to call a site manager. The election official will roll out this integrated cart with the voting machine, the ballot printer, an uninterruptible power supply to power all this equipment, and a check-in station to check in the voter. The voter will vote from the comfort of their vehicle. The voter will print their ballot, review their ballot, put it in a secrecy sleeve, and then our election official will cast the ballot on behalf of the voter inside the vote center. This is the first time, I believe, in the state of Nevada that anything like this has been offered for literally curbside voting for the ADA community. So I'm pretty happy and proud about that. Other things in Washoe County that we have done to consider for ADA community is we've overhauled our complete website to provide ADA digital compliance. We offer our sample ballot booklet in large print if requested from the ADA community. Our voting system has, I mentioned earlier, audio ballot, a tactile interface for this community, for the blind, high, low contrast, headphones, and sip and puff capabilities for those who need that. Our ADA voters are offered the front of the line pass if they cannot stand in line. So they can come right up to the front of the line, we'll wave them in, and they will get access to a voting booth right away if they decide to come into our vote center and not call our hotline for the curbside voting program. And inside our vote centers, we do have accessible voting booths. We used to offer one. We will be offering two now that we have the compliant curbside voting. And also, we had to modify our mail ballot drop boxes to be compliant. We had bought over 120 drop boxes before the 2024 election. When the DOJ came, they said, your drop boxes are not compliant, the handle's not long enough, so please rebuy all these new drop boxes. With the help of one of my deputies, we went through and we worked with our facilities to engage and prolong the handle or make it longer so that we didn't have to spend taxpayer money all over again to buy compliant drop boxes. That is my presentation. If you have any questions, I think Lorraine is going to go and then we can answer any questions afterwards.
Yes, let's go to Lorena and then we can do questions for both at the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee members, good morning. Lorena Portillo, Clark County Registrar of Voters, proudly serving Clark County voters since 1998. Thank you for having me here. Thank you. In Clark County, accessibility is a foundational element of election administration. Accessibility is a critical factor in many of the decisions we make, including voting site selection, what equipment we use, and training for our permanent and temporary staff. All of our voting sites have wheelchair accessibility and voting booths, and voting machines that have audio and tactile accessible equipment. Also, during the past year, we have been working with a private consultant to evaluate all of our voting sites and improve accessibility. All voting sites have bilingual workers, and we continue to work with the deaf and hard of hearing community to provide ASL interpreters at convenient locations and times during early voting. In addition, all of our voting materials are available in English, Spanish, and Filipino, and an increasing amount of our election information is available in Chinese. We are always striving to go above and beyond in serving the members of our community. Our objective is not simply to meet statutory requirements, but to ensure that every eligible voter in Clark County can participate privately, independently, and with dignity. We comply with several federal laws that establish accessibility standards, such as ADA, HAVA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Voting Rights Act as well. All of these federal laws provide the accessibility, not only regulation, but the guidelines that we must follow in order to provide the accessibility to our folks that need it. We, like Washoe County, have gone through several stages in ensuring that each site has when we are compliant. And Clark County not only meets these requirements, but integrates accessibility into operational planning from the outset of each election cycle. Our goal is equitable voter access, not just minimum compliance. In 2025, Clark County retained PCNA Consulting Group to conduct a comprehensive ADA review of more than 180 polling locations. This review included third-party site evaluations, documentation aligned with the U.S. Department of Justice guidance, formal written assessments for each location, and when deficiencies were identified, site-specific mitigation plans were developed and implemented with sufficient lead time. If a site could not be brought into compliance, a compliant alternative location was secured nearby. In 2024, we were able to mitigate many of the issues that were brought up by the Department of Justice, and many more were mitigated with just changing the actual sites. Thankfully, we are very fortunate here in Clark County. We do have sites that are in compliance, and we were able to use the majority that we already have used in other elections. This process ensured every polling location underwent formal accessibility evaluation prior to voting. Clark County ensures voters with disabilities can cast ballots privately and independently. Key measures include all voting booths are wheelchair accessible, not just one, but all. 2 audio and tactile accessible machines per site, ballot marking devices available in English, Spanish, and Filipino, extensive pre-election testing of accessible equipment. Accessible voting equipment is not isolated to a single station. Accessibility is integrated across the voting floor on all voting machines. On-site bilingual election workers are present to assist voters as needed. Large print materials are provided as the standard format. We do not require our voters to request it. We already do that in advance, reducing the need for special requests. These measures ensure compliance with HABA's requirement for private and independent voting. Clark County goes beyond minimum requirements through proactive initiatives. These include expanded ADA-focused poll worker training, training on voter assistance rights and service animal guidance, production of traditional Chinese materials beyond federal requirements, 4 ASL-supported voting locations with on-staff interpreters in 2024, and we are working really hard with our advocacy groups to expand the project in 2026. Development of ASL integrated demonstration videos for long-term voting sites. We will have a big screen at the majority of our long-term voting sites that will allow voters to see this not only in their preferred language, but also will provide sign language on the screen as well for them while they vote and while they wait in line to vote. A language translation device currently is in development to assist voters in additional languages. And of course, accessibility evolves as our community evolves. Clark County continues to expand support in response to community needs. We view accessibility as an ongoing responsibility, not a static checklist. And that is my presentation, but I really wanted to close out by saying that our objective is not simply to meet statutory requirements, but to ensure that every eligible voter in Clark County can participate privately, independently, and with dignity. Accessibility is central to public trust in our democratic process. Thank you for having me here. I'm happy to answer any questions. And of course, that's my contact information. I'll be happy to assist in any way, or you can come visit us anytime. We love visits. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your presentations. Members, do we have any questions? Yes, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to our Clark County Registrar for all your hard work and everything you do to help make sure our citizens can participate in the democratic process. My question about the ASL sites, are those 4 sites available on Election Day and during early voting, or just one or the other?
Lorena Portillo. Yes, so we do work with the advocacy groups, and they actually have the liberty to provide which dates and times works best for them. We did have early voting and Election Day in 2024.
Thank you. And brief follow-up, Chair, with your permission.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned those advocacy groups. Is that how the election department lets hearing impaired individuals know where those sites are, or is there other methods that the election department uses, or is it primarily advocacy groups?
Lorena Portillo. We actually piloted this program in the general election. We had not done this in the past. It worked out very well, and many advocacy groups such as Silver State Voices, All Voting is Local. We worked with Obiama very closely to ensure that it worked and it was effective, and it was. So now we could definitely expand. We want to make sure other folks know that if you want your constituents to know about this program, we'll be happy to assist.
Thank you very much. That's excellent program, Registrar Portillo. And, working in the courts, and sometimes when I have a hearing impaired client, it can be a challenge finding an ASL interpreter and having them there for court. So I appreciate everything Clark County Election Department is doing to help hearing impaired individuals be able to vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you so much, Chair, and big thank you to both of our registrars for being here today and sharing this important information. I'm sorry if I missed it, but could you both just share where the funding comes from to do all of these very important work so that our public is aware?
Lorena Portillo, thank you for the question. Our county is very supportive Clark County commissioners, senior management. They're very supportive of everything we do, and the majority is provided by the county. Oftentimes, we do receive funding from grants that the Secretary of State receives. We upfront the cost, of course, and then we have partial reimbursement of those expenses. In 2024, we did have some additional grants that really helped and alleviated many of the costs that was related to the extensive amount of poll workers that we needed and additional in-office staff that we needed for the mail ballot processes, because we increased our capacity by implementing double shifts, which we had never done in the past, but that allowed us to finish for the very first time everything we received up to Election Day the very next day. Thank you.
This is Andrew McDonald, Washoe County. Very similar to Clark County, very supportive county here in regards to how they are working with us and helping us fund this. Regarding ADA specifically, we did receive a capital improvement project of $400,000 to procure these ADA voting carts that we'll be using for this election. Obviously, we won't be spending all $400,000 on that. It's also to buy ramps, cones, anything, striping that we can do for the ADA community to bring an awareness and give them access to the ballot. But I do want to say, you know, funding is going to be the key linchpin in accessible voting moving forward. Again, these parking structures, parking lots, we don't control all the facilities where we have voting. At the Washoe County facilities, we do. But the city of Reno, the city of Sparks, and private businesses, we can ask them, please make your location accessible, should be already. But if they too don't have the budget, we have to find other locations or provide that modification, hence the curbside voting program to be compliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions up north? Oh, I can't.
No, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your presentations. We will now move on to our next agenda item, which is a presentation on language access for elections. We will hear from Valeria Martinez from the Language Access Program Officer and Cal Bone, the Tribal Outreach Coordinator, both with the Office of the Secretary of State on language access.
Thank you, Chair. Mark Voloshin for the record, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. I'm going to buy my colleague Valerie a few quick moments while she sets up the PowerPoint down there. First, by doing a very brief introduction. The next 4 presentations for the committee are from staff members from the Office of the Secretary of State, starting with language access, then moving through as the agenda indicates. I did want to call out real fast that the presentations you're going to be hearing today, while you will see me up at the table, again, I'm proud to have my colleagues next to me that will be doing the presentations. These are the key subject matter experts who have been oftentimes working behind the scenes in the Office of the Secretary of State for years. Some of the individuals you'll hear from today truly have forgotten more about elections than I will ever know. And I'm proud to pull them out of the hard work they've been doing preparing for the 2026 election cycle, truly, which has begun the day after the general in 24 and continues into today. So again, 4 presentations, but very much appreciate the opportunity to provide this information to the committee, both at this meeting and potentially at future ones. So that being said, I think she's about ready.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to the presentation. Go ahead and begin whenever you're ready.
Sorry, all. My name is Valerie Martinez. I am the Language Access Program Coordinator for the Secretary of State's office. Thank you for having me today. And with Mark, I have my colleague, Cal Boone. If you'd like to introduce himself as well.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and the committee. My name is Cal Boone. I serve as the Tribal Liaison and Language Access Assistant for the Secretary of State's office. Thank you.
today we'll be talking to you about a few things for our language access team. What we want to go over just briefly is our vision and the legislative context of what the language access program is. We'll be talking about our 2026 plan for this coming election year, as well as the 2027 non-election year expectations that we have. How we're going to build trust, guardrails, and plain language for the citizens of Nevada, as well as the way that we're going to move forward and measure these successes as they come. So ensuring equitable access to elections is a fundamental to functioning democracy. Neglecting language access can result in costly legal challenges, administrative delays, and cause an erosion of public trust. These are all outcomes that we are determined to prevent. And so as such, we at the Secretary of State's office are committed to providing statewide, plain language, multilingual, and accessible election information that empowers every voter, regardless of their language or their abilities. The current language access program was established in 2023 following the implementation of Section 203 requirements with the Voting Rights Act. The program became more intentional with updates under Assembly Bill 367 in 2025. AB 367 strengthens the language access requirements and set new standards for inclusivity in the election process. The updates from 2025 were as follows. The term voting materials was defined, so specifically to mean that that includes all registrations and pre-registrations to register to vote, ballots and ballot instructions, voting instructions, polling location information and instructions, notices required for an election, ballot questions, and voter assistance forms. This bill also provides the SOS with the latitude to determine any other materials that need to be translated as well. It also, AB 367 also established that there is a requirement to have 7 languages plus ASL available online with audio support for oral languages. These 7 languages are typically the 7 language under federal law, which is the Federal Law 52 USC 1053. However, if at any time the federal law has less than 7 languages listed, Nevada has committed to maintain the 7 language minimum. The bill also established or clarified that there would be a toll-free hotline that has at least 200 languages available for users, that there be an established certified translator available so that this can prevent potential for bias or alterations from uncertified or unreliable translators like a family friend, a family member, or some other invested party. It requires that we maintain a language access coordinator position and that mobile devices and include interpretive access such as for ASL. Finally, it did establish that the baseline materials all need to be set forth in Spanish and English for all things that are created. These measures take steps to ensure that language is no longer a barrier to civic participation. So during this 2026 year, our immediate focus is implementing these things from AB 367. So far, we've already established the language access coordinator position, which is the role I'm in that I'm speaking to you from today. We've established the toll-free hotline. We also have contracts with certified translators, and we've released all of our baseline materials in English and Spanish. What is currently in progress is that we are working on getting all of our documents in those 7 languages online right now. We are developing education videos in American Sign Language and in Shoshone, which is a oral language only. There's no written form, so we're going to have videos for that. We plan to launch NVE's demonstrations to showcase how accessible voting technology works in video and at events where there are online resources that are available. We are working on deploying PBS and social media campaigns to reach diverse communities. These messages are designed to be short explainer videos on topics like how voting works, how to read your sample ballot, what are mail ballots or drop boxes, what to bring with you, same-day registration, things of that nature. These videos will address accessibility options and election timelines. Then we do want to work on strengthening our community engagement. We're going to do this by going through trusted channels, meeting voters exactly where they are, in familiar spaces where we already have reliable, credible messengers that they trust. This includes coordinated outreach efforts with the library districts, DMV service centers, the public transit system, as well as leveraging QR codes with links to learning hubs and partnerships with places like the Department of Employment Training and Rehab, specifically with vocational rehabilitation and the aging and disability services teams. These efforts will feature looping educational videos in these places where people are congregating or sitting for long periods of time. And those topics will include details about what voting options are, how language assistance is available if you need it, how you can get that accessibility at polls, how mail-in ballots are processed, and how secure transmission works through the EASE system. After this 2026 year, in 2027, we realized that we want to go beyond compliance. We aim to deepen engagement year-round, not just during an election season. So to achieve this, we plan to expand our tribal advisory listening tours to ensure that we are being culturally responsive in our practices. Tribes have unique cultural and linguistic needs, including them while we're planning our materials, make sure that we're accurate, respectful, and effective in what we're doing. The listening tours and advisory councils build credibility and long-term partnerships with those communities for later election periods. We also plan in 2027 to expand from the required 7 languages to include the top 15 languages that are spoken in Nevada. We will continue to we will continue as we go on to assess the effectiveness of our interpreter networks and the tools that we're using, making sure that the community who is using these finds them effective, or if there are any issues that we can address those. We don't want to do things that are what we perceive the public needs. We want to know how they need the information or if what we're doing is accurate. We're also going to be pre-producing multilingual ASL and audio assets for the 2028 election cycle. By proactively developing all of these resources, we can make sure that they are accessible for all voters, they are clear, and that it reduces any confusion or errors. And this, approaching it in this way will help us to avoid any last-minute operational challenges or supporting any compliance issues. As we move forward with these initiatives, the next priority is making sure that we're ensuring trust and clarity in every voter interaction. Transparency must be the cornerstone of our approach, particularly as we integrate technology into our election systems. By implementing technology guardrails, requiring human verification, and adopting plain language standards, we will safeguard accuracy and foster confidence in the democratic process. So to do this, we will be creating a single source presentation with the same branding and identical image for all languages, so everything is mirrored across all channels for us and any partners. We will implement transparency tags and clerk verification so that it shows the last updates and when an individual last looked at the details. Our language access does also commit to using AI only for drafting with strict guardrails to prevent any bias. And some of those guardrails would include a commitment to maintain human, factual, and cultural review before any type of publishing, and prioritizing human narrators for audio in all of their contexts. If there were a chance that we were to use, we would clearly label where, how, or if AI was used. The legislators and the public need assurance that technology is going to enhance our efficiency without compromising or any trust or accuracy by our departments. Lastly, we will make sure that we are applying a plain language checklist to ensure readability, visual clarity, and accessibility across all formats. The plain language checklist will ensure that all written materials are designed to be easily understood, not being overly complex so that the regular Nevadan may be able to understand, including individuals with limited English proficiency or those who face challenges with reading comprehension. So with these foundations in place, as we move forward, our focus will then shift into deepening engagement and addressing systemic barriers. Our staff will continue to move forward to expand our institutional knowledge, will strengthen our presence in these community spaces, and intentionally design initiatives that serve marginalized populations. These steps are to make sure that every voter has equitable access and that our election systems reflect the diversity of our state. We plan on attending different conferences to make sure that we have the most up-to-date resources and tools available for our teams. We'll visit those community spaces, navigating town halls, educational institutions, senior centers, public agencies that provide social services, intentionally meeting people in places where people build relationships and trust during non-election periods as well. And our marginalized specific initiatives are designed to foster community and ownership, which drives higher turnout and engagement during the election cycle. So when communities feel excluded, confidence declines and systematic barriers persist. But for the language access team, this specifically falls into 3 categories: reaching out for ADA compliance, the language limited English proficient or LEP individuals, and plain language. Because of this, we're developing initiatives for the deaf and hard of hearing communities, LEP individuals, and young, new, or undereducated voters. These are the focus of who we're keeping in mind as we're developing this information. Our success, or how we will manage or monitor what we're achieving, is to measure the number of multilingual assets that we have live on our site, tracking the interpreter and ASL usage rates, monitoring the viewing and engagement that we have on videos and content, event attendance at locations or events that we're having, the number of poll workers being recruited, and surveys from the community and taking their feedback into account. Language access is not a one-time initiative. It's a cornerstone of democratic integrity. As we move forward, our focus will remain on innovation or modernization and inclusion, and trust and transparency with the public. These steps will help us to create an election system that reflects the diversity of Nevada and strengthens the foundation of our democracy for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martinez, and thank you for everything you're doing to improve language access for voters all over the state. Really appreciate it. Do you prefer I open up to questions now or go up to Carson City and then open it up to questions?
No questions up here.
Okay. And no members, any questions, Senator Daly? Did you have a question? Members, any questions? Assemblymember Mosca.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. Thank you for this. I know that we have heard these bills over the last couple of years, and it's pretty amazing, actually, all the work that the Secretary's office has been able to do. I was just wondering, for national context, this seems like a lot of different programming and a lot of things. Do you know nationally, is this on trend with what others are doing? Is this maybe even better than what other states are doing, or just would love some context on that?
Valerie Martinez, for the record. From my experience and what I've been researching, it is on trend with states that are similar in demographics to ours. So a lot of Western states, we are right on par with what they're doing. Not necessarily states that are less diverse than ours. They don't have as many options as available. But yes, we can see that it is definitely a trend to have more inclusivity around.
You're welcome. Any follow-up? No. Members, any additional questions? None. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you everything you're doing to improve language access. I'll head back to Carson City.
Thank you.
I wasn't sure if Mr. Boone or Deputy Secretary of State Woloshyn, if there are any comments you'd like to make, or if there are any questions.
Cal Boone for the record. I guess similar to the previous question, what I did want to let the committee know too is that in terms of tribal engagement, I believe Nevada is leading the way across the country for what that looks like, especially in regards to elections. So when we look at the Shoshone Language Access Project, that is something that we're proactively taking to provide language access to Shoshone language speakers, as and that resulted from our consultation tours, so going out to the tribes and meeting with them. And so I just wanted to share that in that regard too. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boone and Deputy Secretary Woloshyn. Certainly it is really, I think, a model for the nation, and what you're doing in terms of reaching out to tribes and providing language access. I've certainly, I can't remember if it was NCSL or one of the other organizations, but I saw what Nevada's doing mentioned as a guide for other states. So I was very proud of what you're doing, and it's awesome to be able to make sure that tribal members can vote. Members, any questions? I don't see any down here. Senator Daley up in Carson City? No questions. Well, thank you very much. With that, we will close item 7. And next, we're going to move on to item number 8. We've got an overview of the 2026 Elections Procedure Manual, and we have Heather Hardy, Help America Vote Act Administrator, Office of the Secretary of State, and our Deputy Secretary of State, Mark Woloshyn. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm Heather Hardy, a HAVA administrator with the Secretary of State's Office Elections Division. Today, I will provide an overview of the Nevada Elections Procedures Manual, including its structure, purpose, and statutory foundation. I will then discuss the benefits and objectives, outline our review and public feedback process, and conclude with the path forward as we prepare for the 2026 and 2028 election cycles. While there were draft versions of the Elections Procedure Manual that had been started over the last few years, it was not formally established until the statutory requirement was created during the 2023 legislative session. The purposes are listed on the slide, but more broadly, it's intended to act as a tool for 2 separate audiences. The first are election officials. There has been a lot of turnover in state, county, and city election officials over the past 6 years, and this manual will help onboard new elections staff across our state so that they have a resource beyond just a list of statutes and regulations. The second audience is the public. As more Nevadans look for information about how our elections are administered or seeking guidance about how to run for office or file a petition, this manual will be an ideal go-to resource. The manual itself is organized into 7 chapters and 3 appendices to reflect the full life cycle of election administration. Chapter 1 outlines the general information and Nevada's election framework. Chapter 2 focuses on voters, registration, list maintenance, challenges, and language access. Chapter 3 addresses election administration procedures, including voting methods, ballot requirements, canvassing, certification, and audit processes. Chapter 4 covers candidate and campaign finance reporting requirements. Chapter 5 details petition processes and political action committee requirements. Chapter 6 defines the roles and responsibilities of city clerks. Chapter 7 focuses on election security, including physical security systems and data protections. The appendixes provide critical reference tools. Appendix A is a 2026 election reference. Appendix B is a glossary of election terminology. And Appendix C is a user guide for key election applications, including Aurora candidate filing, Aurora campaign finance, and total vote. The structure is designed to be practical and user-friendly, allowing election officials, policymakers, and the public to easily locate guidance, requirements, or timelines. The manual is a living document in that it is not expected to remain without changes for decades at a time. It will be amended on a biannual basis with statutory updates, regulatory changes, and operational lessons learned. Here's how that will look. Following a legislative session, we will identify changes in state election law as well as any changes to federal law since the last approval. Then we will conduct our biennial regulatory review to create, amend, or repeal any election regulations that may also need to be updated based on the changes from the legislative session or lessons learned during the previous election cycle. Finally, we will take all of those changes and update the Elections Procedures Manual before bringing it to the Legislative Commission for approval. That approval process effectively ends the updating process with exceptions of very minor non-substantive changes for the following biennium. By centralizing and standardizing guidance and the update process, the Elections Procedure Manual will reduce uncertainty and promotes consistency statewide. In addition to the changes to state and federal law, though, we continue to seek input and ideas regarding how to make the manual better for its intended audience. The Secretary of State's office works closely with county and city election officials, as well as subject matter experts, to review legal requirements and discuss operational best practices. We also held 3 separate public meetings allowing individuals and organizations to review the manual, submit feedback, and recommend changes. Those meetings were very informative and helped highlight a number of different opportunities for future enhancements. Additionally, we maintain a dedicated elections procedure correction and feedback form to allow ongoing suggestions outside of the formal review periods. This process ensures the Elections Procedure Manual reflects both statutory requirements and administrative best practices. Looking ahead, we have a number of non-substantive changes that we intend to incorporate, such as adding citations to NRS as the legislative changes from the 2025 regular session are codified across Title 24. We plan to do the same regarding the changes in regulation, which will be going in front of the Legislative Commission next week on February 26th. Finally, the process I described earlier is already underway. We continue to receive feedback, some of which will require approval by the Legislative Commission before we can formally incorporate it into the manual. We also anticipate that we will need to move quickly and be very efficient with our time in 2027. There is at least one ballot question that may be passed by a vote by the voters, and potentially other significant changes from the 2027 session that will need to be discussed, reviewed, and incorporated before candidate filing begins for the presidential preference primary in October of 2027. After all, we want to make sure the reference is updated and useful to all candidates and election officials prior to the start of the 2028 presidential election cycle. Chair and members, the Elections Procedure Manual is fundamentally about transparency, uniformity, and building public confidence and trust in Nevada's elections. We appreciate the committee's continued partnership and oversight and are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hardy. Thank you for your excellent presentation and for all your hard work on the Elections Procedure Manual. Members, actually, first, I think I'd like to go to Carson City. Senator Daley, do you have any questions? And I'll come back down here to Las Vegas.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I do have a couple of questions, comments a little bit, and thank you for the presentation. It did answer or give me more comfort on a couple of just questions and various things. And of course, as you know, the Election Procedure Manual was set up to be, quote unquote, a regulation on purpose, right? So that there would be some checks and balances to the otherwise executive authority that the elected Secretary of State may have to make unilateral changes that may or may not be in compliance with law and various things, just what they prefer to have be the rules. So I understand that you're going to be coming back with some minor changes coming up, and then after the elections and after ballot questions, you'll update them, and that will go through the full regulatory process where you have to send out the notice, have a workshop, and then a hearing, get comments back from the people that actually run the elections in the 17 counties in the state for their feedback, because I know we relied heavily on the, what I think 270 pages the manual is. I've been through a lot of this stuff, and you look at it and there's things I'm going, I hope they got it right? Lots of people looking at it though. It'll go through the full regulatory process for changes after elections or after legislative sessions.
Good morning, Senator Dillon. Mark Voloshin for the record. Just to clarify, the statute specifically calls out that the Elections Procedure Manual, just to clarify, is not a regulation. It specifically is intended to not conflict with statute or regulations. So really, it's below the regulations. So the process is defined in the statutes and confirmed by the Office of the Attorney General. It absolutely requires approval, as you've mentioned, by the Legislative Commission. But the regulatory process of a public workshop followed by a regulatory adoption hearing, then going to the Legislative Commission, that the procedure manual does not follow that process. The three public meetings that Ms. Hardy identified and talked about were our opportunities to get feedback, because transparency, of course, is absolutely imperative in the electoral process, period. But just want to clarify for the record that while yes, the non-substantive changes can be applied, citations is an excellent example that Ms. Hardy mentioned. If it's a substantive change, we've received a lot of really good suggestions that would require that. Those are going into a draft version that will not be a formal part of the procedure manual, not even published. It stays on our working document until it gets in front of the Legislative Commission sometime leading up to the next election cycle. And finally, in closing, I assess, and based on my conversations with Heather and the rest of the team and our state and county election officials, I believe that the version the Legislative Commission just recently approved is it for the 26 election cycle, minus citations or some other very, very non-substantive tweaks. And speaking of non-substantive tweaks, just to put on the record, whenever we do have questions, even for the citations, we go immediately, first and foremost, to the Office of the Attorney General. Is adding citations to each page pointing back at NRS, is it a substantive change or is it not? And if they say, no, that is not substantive based on our conversations and what we're talking about, only then will we apply it, and we will keep a track, a record of that, so the public can be aware of what those non-substantive changes are. And we are deferring to not make changes simply because that it's somewhat vague, and we certainly don't want to be accused of taking advantage of the vagueness of a non-substantive change. We would rather hold off on applying those until we can get it in front of the Legislative Commission appropriately, which will likely occur again, as Heather mentioned, I think September of 27 is when we next anticipate going back to the Legislative Commission.
And thank you for that. And I know you and I talked when we were at the Legislative Commission, I'm on that committee as well, about the non-substantive and how that's a little bit in flux and can be potentially expanded or abused, right? So the state election officer, secretary of state, whoever that might be in the future, can look at that and say, well, I consider it to be non-substantive. I take advice from lawyers at my deputy attorney generals, but I get to make the decision, so they can say it's substantive and say, no, I disagree, and move forward. So on that, if it's substantive, you got to come back to the Legislative Commission, which is that checks and balances. We don't want people rewriting the election law based on their belief that they want to have it be this way. And we're looking at, or I'm thinking of, and maybe this committee will chime in, I don't know, on saying, hey, even if it's a non-substantive issue and you've got the blessing of the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, that even those non-substantive ones would have to, at some point, in order, before they become permanent, you can make them, but before they become permanent, have to go in front of the Legislative Commission to have, LCB and our staff and the elected officials overseeing that, to have that checks and balances come back to the Legislative Commission, because then it removes the vagueness on substantial versus non-substantial. Because then if it even is substantial, but it's approved by the Legislative Commission, you can do it. But I think it takes additional legislation at this point. Is that your understanding?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Mark Velasquez, for the record. Yes, that's my understanding as well.
Okay. And I'm, everything goes well with the next election, planning on doing that, but maybe this committee will want to give its blessing to that as well. I think that was all. I have some general questions at the end when you get to your, may not be related to things that are on your thing here. But I did want to talk about the manual changes, and I think you've got a good process in place. It just needs to be followed. We get that last little piece in. I think we'll make it, give people the confidence that we're looking for in the process and what that manual says. The only other question I would have on is, if I can, Mr. Vice Chair, or is the chair back? Anyway.
Please go ahead.
When you, now that you have this here and everybody has to follow it, what are the processes in place if somebody just says, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. I disagree with it. I'm the elected county clerk and I got the support of my county commission, so I'm not going to follow your manual.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Mark Velasquez, for the record. In that hypothetical, and I want to start by saying that, again, we at the Office of the Secretary of State do work very closely with our 17 county and 18 city elected officials, or elections officials, the clerks and registrars as appropriate. No indication or warning that any of them currently would take that. I want to put that on the record because, again, all are men and women of integrity and character who want to follow the law, flat out, state and federal law. Supposing, though, to your question, that one of them saw something in the procedure manual and said flat out, not doing it. The steps that we would take would look very similar to a series of phone calls, emails. It would increasingly become in writing to get clarification. There would be discussions about the interpretation of the requirement. Why is that problematic? Given that the procedure manual is unable to conflict with statute or regulations, truly it wouldn't be a slight or a violation of the procedure manual. It would be a violation of a regulation or statute, which absolutely would be problematic. The conversations that would start one-on-one with myself and the county or city official would transition fairly quickly to their counsel and our counsel talking going through to make sure that we understood and could resolve that sort of disagreements or confusion. And I firmly believe, and it happens that oftentimes that if there's questions, concerns, or confusion with us or a county or city election official, that's usually, frankly, where it stops. We get clarity, we get on the same page, and then we move forward and follow state and federal law. Beyond that, though, it would shift quickly into the hands of the legal team to address and enforce compliance. Again, Secretary Aguilar is the chief officer of elections. He does not pick or choose the federal or state laws that we follow, and neither do our county or city election officials. These are the laws that were put in place by our elected legislature and signed by the governor, and they will be followed to the benefit of Nevadans, period.
And thank you for that. And it was a little bit of the question I might have had later about the canvassing issues and various things. And I know there was legislation last session. We didn't get it across the finish line on that. But when I go back and I read the provisions of NRS 283.440, it says whenever a complaint in writing is duly verified, oath of any complaints presented, does the Secretary of State's office have the authority, or do you have to go through the Attorney General? I think the Secretary of State can say, hey, we have this complaint, I'm going to verify the complaint and get it into court for malfeasance and malpractice, malfeasance in office, so the person can be removed if they're elected positions, including the county commissioners that are enabling.
Thank you for the question, Senator Mark Voloshin, for the record. I apologize, and while I've seen NRS 283-440, I haven't yet reviewed it. If it's possible, I'd like to review that, get an answer to you in writing, perhaps after the meeting today, if that's acceptable.
That's fine, Deputy Secretary of State. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes,
Any additional questions, Senator Daley?
No, I was just going to say, yes, that would be useful, because I'd like to know who has that enforcement. Is it dual? Is it one office? Is it the other? Theoretically, the legislature could make the complaint if we knew about it and various things. So I just wanted to know how that, if there's an interpretation on how that enforcement would work. I can ask LCB too, but maybe we need to clarify that both the Secretary of State, Attorney General's office, any person, if it's a valid complaint, can get that and get that to court. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions, Senator Daley?
Not on this, thanks.
No? Okay, I thought you had maybe hit a couple more. Members down here in the Las Vegas hearing room, any questions? No, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Hardy. Thank you, Deputy Secretary of State Voloshin, for your presentation. With that, we will now close agenda item 8, and we are going to move on to agenda item, pardon me, I am so sorry. We have Assemblymember Dickman on Zoom, but before we move on to the next agenda item, Assemblymember Dickman, are there any questions you have, either for Ms. Hardy or for Deputy Secretary of State Voloshin? I think you might have mute on. We can't hear you.
You'd think I'd be better at this. I'm so sorry.
No, now we hear you.
No, I don't have any questions right now. Thank you so much, though, Vice Chair.
Thank you. And if you do have a question, please don't hesitate just to jump in, because I'm not always seeing your window. I see it now, but I'm not always seeing it. So for any reason you have a question and I'm not recognizing you and I'm missing that you are wanting to be recognized, please just turn on your mic and jump in and let us know you want to address one of the presenters. With that, we are now going to move on to thank you, Assemblymember Dickman. We're going to move on to agenda item number 9. We are very fortunate to have Deanna Spicula, our Help America Vote Act Administrator with the Office of the Secretary of State, and Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, Mark Voloshin, here. Thank you both for presenting today.
All right, good morning, Chair Gonzalez, Vice Chair Orenshaw, and committee members. My name is Deanna Spicula, and I'm the second Hub Administrator in the Office of the Secretary of State, Elections Division, and I will be providing you a presentation on ballot design and mail ballot envelopes. From a governance perspective, the Secretary of State's role as Chief Officer of Elections is critical in ensuring compliance with state and federal election laws, ensuring the efficiency and accuracy of ballots and the mail ballot processes implemented throughout the state, and the adoption of regulations to carry out the provisions of the Nevada revised statutes. In this presentation, we will be reviewing the statutory authority of the Secretary of State and those responsibilities as they relate to ballots and mail balloting materials, the components that make up ballot setup and design, the addition of the statewide mail ballot contract and the benefits related to this past legislation, and the requirements of the mail ballot with some sample materials provided as a visual reference for those components. The Secretary of State serves as the Chief Officer of Elections, responsible for the execution and enforcement of election laws in Nevada. This includes adopting necessary regulations to carry out these provisions. Under NRS 293-250, the Secretary of State prescribes the form of all ballots and mail ballots, including the items listed on the screen. This list essentially describes the public-facing elements of the ballot, so the placement in the list of the races and questions on a ballot, regardless if it's used for in-person voting or on a mail ballot, or using our effective absentee system for elections known as NVEs. In other words, if a voter is going to look at it while voting, it is regulated by state law and falls to the Secretary to prescribe and enforce the exact information. So what goes into ballot setup? Ballot setup includes elements such as the order of the listing of offices, candidates, and questions, the placement of party names or abbreviations after each candidate name, the use of names including given names, surnames, and nicknames, the use of none of these candidates as required for certain offices, the placement of state and local ballot questions, and the preparation of separate primary ballots required for primary elections or the single ballot format for the general election. There are 3 separate types of ballots that must be prepared for each election cycle. Of course, we're coming into a primary election, so we're looking at the primary partisan ballots that are created for each of the major political parties and contain major political party candidates and nonpartisan office candidates and are voted upon by voters who are registered with one of the 2 major political parties. The next is the nonpartisan primary ballot, and that contains only nonpartisan offices and candidates and are voted upon by all other voters who are not registered with one of the 2 major political parties. And then we have our general election ballots. Those contain all candidates for which a voter is entitled to vote on in the election, regardless of political party affiliation of the candidates or the voter. The setting up of a ballot and the layout begins with the certified list of candidates and determining the omissions in appearance, or rather the conditions for when an office and candidates appear on a primary ballot, the general election ballot, or may be deemed elected without having to appear on either under certain circumstances. This determines the list of offices and candidates that will appear on a ballot. There are additional requirements besides the omission and appearance that determine when a candidate appears on a ballot, such as the requirements for minor party or independent candidates for partisan office. NRS 293.1715 details when a minor party candidate running for a partisan office appears on the ballot. The minor party must qualify as a minor party in the state and have filed a certificate of existence, and the minor party must submit a list of candidates for partisan office with the Secretary of State, and those candidates must also file a declaration of candidacy with the appropriate filing officer. Minor party candidates of a minor party with ballot access who are running for partisan office will appear only on the general election ballot. Likewise, independent candidates for partisan office must also file a declaration of candidacy with the appropriate filing officer, but must also circulate a petition of candidacy and obtain the required number of signatures to appear on the ballot. Independent candidates for partisan office will also only appear on the ballot for the general election. In Nevada, we have closed primaries, which means that for a primary election, there will be 3 ballot styles created for each precinct. 1 ballot style for each major political party, which will also include the nonpartisan offices for which those voters are eligible to vote, and a nonpartisan ballot style for those voters who are not registered with either of the major political parties that will include only nonpartisan offices. For reference, the term ballot style refers to the combination of offices and candidates for which the voters in each precinct are entitled to vote. However, our general election ballots, we only have one ballot style for each precinct that contains all of the combinations of offices and candidates that a voter is eligible to vote in for the election, including all major and minor party candidates, independent candidates, and nonpartisan office candidates. Additionally, ballots are created in three manners to accommodate our elections, including an electronic file that is used to program the electronic voting equipment for in-person voting, the mail ballot artwork, known as ballot faces, that are used for the mail ballot voting, and the digital version to be used by our NVE system, which generates a precinct-specific ballot for every voter who uses EASE based on their residential address anywhere in our state. Since the emergency measures put into place during the 2020 elections in response to the COVID pandemic, and then the subsequent passage of Assembly Bill 321 in 2021, all active registered voters in our state are sent a mail ballot for each election unless they opt out of receiving a ballot by mail not later than 60 days before Election Day. Since the passage of AB 321 in 2021, additional statutes and regulations have been passed to strengthen the administering of mail ballot voting in Nevada. This includes the passage of AB 192 in 2023, codified in NRS 293.2694, which assists the counties and the state with the procurement of qualified vendors to provide the printing of mail ballots for our electorate. This statute allows the Secretary of State to enter into one or more contracts for the purchase of all ballots and return envelopes for the use in statewide or local elections held in the state, and each county may choose to use the state contracted vendor by simply notifying the Secretary of State of their intentions to use the state vendor. The vendor or vendors must be chosen through the state procurement process and must comply with all state contract requirements, as well as being an approved print vendor for all voting systems in use in the state. Currently, we have ES&S and Liberty Voting, and must deposit the mail ballot for mailing at a location within the state. This is a benefit to both the state and the counties, as this increases the purchasing power by leveraging economies of scale, increased standardization and integration with fewer vendor contracts to manage, and ensuring more consistent products and service quality for Nevada voters. For the 2026 election cycle, 16 counties have elected to use the state contracted vendor for the printing of their mail ballots. There are many requirements that we must adhere to for our mail ballots and the supplemental materials, including the outgoing and return mail ballot envelopes, which must be uniform throughout the state and includes a method of distinguishing the return envelope for each county, for which we use a color bar on the envelopes to distinguish between each county. Examples of some of the requirements include that they must be sent by first-class mail or by any class of mail in the official elections mail logo, or equivalent logo created by USPS is properly placed on the return envelope. The envelope must be postage prepaid by first-class mail. In addition, each ballot must include a secrecy sleeve, voter instructions, and any required documentation that must be submitted by a voter for a ballot to be accepted, if this is indicated for that voter, or if or any other notices that must be included for that election. There are also specific requirements for our mail ballots that help support the transparency of our elections, increase voter access to information about their mail ballot, and providing additional information about how to assist a voter in successfully casting their mail ballot. For instance, each outgoing and return envelope must include a space for the USPS Intelligent Mail Barcode, or IMB, that provides tracking information for ballots as they are scanned by USPS as the ballot moves through the postal system. This information is also used for ballot tracking both at the state and county level, but also available to individual voters, and is a service that voters increasingly express their appreciation for. Also, additional information provided on the mail ballot envelope are the deadlines associated with returning a mail ballot, a statement that informs the voter what will happen if they fail to sign their mail ballot, and information that is required for a voter who is assisting another voter in marking and signing their ballot, and also a statement in Spanish directing Spanish-speaking voters to the Secretary of State's website for additional information. On these two last slides, I'm going to walk you through what this all ends up looking like. This is an example of an outgoing mail ballot envelope with its instructions and secrecy sleeve. There would, of course, also be a mail ballot inside of this packet. You can see how we continuously try to make sure that the information is as clear as possible while ensuring that all legally required text is included. Inside the outbound envelope, and it is an additional, in addition to the ballot instructions and secrecy sleeve, would be an entire return envelope as well. This example shows the many requirements that are also carefully positioned to maximize clarity for the voters. There is one item that I would like to highlight. On the right image, you'll notice an arrow pointing towards a new optional box that will give voters one last chance to provide a phone number or email. The intent here is if a signature cure is needed, there's an additional method for election officials to contact the voter without having to update their voter registration information. That concludes my comprehensive overview of the processes and requirements for ballot design and mail ballot envelopes. I know it may seem particularly complex, but it is something us election officials take incredibly seriously and spend a lot of time on to make sure that by the time you're ready to vote, the instructions are clear and the ballot is in total compliance with state law so that you can focus on casting your ballot. Thank you for your time, and please, any questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation, Administrator Spicula. Members, any questions? I'll start down here in Las Vegas. I'm not seeing any questions. Up in Carson City, Senator Daley.
One quick question, if I can, Mr. Chair. I think it's quick anyway. I know there's a couple of court cases and decisions pending regarding when a ballot is received. And I know state law says if it's postmarked, you can receive up to 4 days afterward. I don't know if you have any updates on that, but with the Postal Service changing their policy of when that postmark gets applied to that piece of mail, which is when they process it rather than receive it, if I understand it correctly. Is the current state of affairs the default? Because currently if there's no postmark on a piece of ballot being returned, as long as it comes in by the 3 days, then it's counted. So if the postmark changes, it's going to default to all ballots regardless, as long as it's received within those 3 days, pending the court outcomes on where that lands. Is any updates or comments on that you can clarify some things with?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Mark Voloshin for the record. 2 parts to the question. The first, an update regarding the U.S. Supreme Court. There is a case in front of them discussing exactly as you said about the legality of accepting a mail ballot after Election Day. It is our understanding that Supreme Court case that we are monitoring very closely, as you can imagine, may have a decision that will come out sometime in June, with June 9th being our primary. If it comes out after that, it would, I think, probably cause less confusion. And then we would simply have to apply its provisions depending on if it requires changes prior to the general, or again, it may say that our state law is acceptable. But that's the first. Again, anticipate that decision in June. And then second, in regards to the U.S. Post Office's change, not only the regional transportation optimization, the RTO process that they've implemented already, as well as the change in their postmark, that definitely is concerning, especially given the vast number of Nevadans who decide to use a mail ballot and in many cases return it through the U.S. Postal Service system. Really what we're looking at is as we discuss those changes and the requirements, adjusting messaging to ensure that Nevadans know if you are going to mail your ballot back, that we recommend you do so no later than a week before the election day. But if it's within a week of Election Day, the recommendation is going to be that they bring it to a polling place and put it into an official drop box at their county, one of the county sites that will be advertised on the website, in the sample ballot, newspapers, and other locations, just to ensure that the ballot is returned, received by the county election official, and processed as appropriate. So again, maybe not using the U.S. Postal Service system, but instead defaulting to bring it to a drop box.
And then follow up, just to be clear, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that each early voting location and then each polling location on Election Day, you can also drop your election ballot at that location anytime during the early voting or on Election Day, in addition to the regular drop boxes. That's correct? That's my understanding. Just want to get that out there.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Mark Voloshin for the record. The vast majority will. There are some specific polling locations that were intended to not have a drop box. But when in doubt, again, those locations, once they are finalized by our county clerks and registrars, will be advertised with a lot of clarity about what is available, including hours of early voting or drop-offs at each location. I do know, though, that in talking with our county election officials across the board, it's a good generalization that they are all, one, aware of these changes, and two, looking very critically at the needs of their electorate in each county because they know their communities best as to how to meet that requirement. In many cases, there will be expanded hours, increased locations, or other means that the county clerks and registrars are taking specifically to make sure that the electorate is not impacted adversely because of these changes by the U.S. Postal Service.
Understood, and we may have to review that, and because everything says postmark, postmark, and now that has changed, so it may take an adjustment there, but let's hope that the court cases come out and says that our timeline is acceptable at the very least. So we'll be watching with the rest of you. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, or Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Daly. Excellent questions and so on point. Senator Steinbeck.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Quick question. I wanted to know if out of the mail-in ballots, if you have a number of that percentage number that have been cast, percentage number that have been returned, and the remaining percentage number.
Thank you for the question, Senator Mark Voloshin, for the record. Just to clarify, specifically for the 24 general election cycle or general election?
Yeah, just in an average year, sir. Yes, just in an average year.
An average year?
Or whichever year you would pick. I'm just trying to get some kind of idea.
Yes, sir. One moment. I actually have an excellent resource that we can look at that will provide that exact information. So looking specifically, if it's acceptable, Senator, may I get that information back to you just after the committee? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That would be great. And if you could provide it to all of the members, that would be awesome. Deputy Secretary of State Voloshin. Any additional questions, members? I guess one question I had, there was mentioned that 16 of our counties have opted into the statewide ballot contract. Which county opted not to, and was there any reason or rationale given as to why they didn't want to have participate in that ballot contract?
Deanna Spicula for the record. 16 of our counties are going with ProVote. I think it's ProVote Solutions out of California. Clark County will remain using Runback out of Arizona. I don't want to speak for their elections office, but I do know that they have used them as their vendor for a significant amount of time. And also they have integrations with their mail ballot sorting equipment. So again, I don't want to speak for Lorena or Lorena Portillo, the registrar down in Clark County, but I'm sure she could provide an answer. We can get that for you if there's additional information other than what I've mentioned that might have contributed to that decision.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think she's left us for today, but I can follow up offline. Thank you. Any additional questions, members? I'm not seeing any. With that, I'd like to close agenda item 9. And if we can move on to agenda item number 10, we have Deputy Secretary of State Mark Voloshin for elections, and we have Rob Nichols, Program Officer 3, also with the Office of the Secretary of State presenting. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Chair Gonzalez, Vice Chair Arnshaw, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present about the candidate filing process. I am Rob Nichols, a Program Officer 3 with the Secretary of State's Office, Elections Division. Today, I'm going to walk through the candidate filing process, and I'll cover the declaration of candidacy and withdrawal deadlines, and then go over the candidate filing timeframes and schedule, and then explain how all those processes fit together. I'll close with a few key takeaways, and important considerations as we look ahead to the 2026 and 2028 election cycles and start preparing for what's coming next, and will then invite questions, comments, and feedback. Before I begin, though, I would also like to clarify that I lead the Secretary of State team that conducts the candidate filing process for candidates for statewide and multi-county offices and who file with the Secretary of State. The process is something that we take very seriously, and we are honored to be a part of. As you all know, the candidate filing process is the first formal step in seeking elected office and is very humbling to help guide candidates through that process. All right, I will start with the 3 key candidate filing windows. First, there is the judicial filing period, which took place from January 5th through January 16th of this year. And during that filing period, we had a total of 153 candidates that filed for judicial office. Of note, there was one filing that was challenged, and that challenge is still going through the legal process. Next, the non-judicial office filing period will run from March 2nd through March 13th, 2026, just under 2 weeks from now. While they also have to file for office during the non-judicial filing period, there are additional steps for independent candidates for partisan office. They are required to gather and submit petition signatures, and those signatures have to be turned in to the appropriate county clerk or registrar of voters not later than June 5th of 2026. I also understand that there are quite a few independent candidates currently that are running for partisan office and who have already started gathering signatures. Statewide, there are 36 filing offices involved in the candidate filing process. For example, as I mentioned, the Secretary of State's office handles things for statewide and multi-county offices. So if a candidate is filing for a statewide position like Attorney General or a multi-county office such as Assembly District 32 or 33, then they would file for candidacy with the Secretary of State's office. County clerks or registrar of voters process filings for county level offices. For example, if a candidate is filing for district attorney or county clerk, they file with the county that they will represent. And then the city clerks will handle the filings for any city-specific offices. For example, if a candidate is filing for mayor or city council, they're going to file with the city that they will represent. For eligibility requirements, there are a few key things to keep in mind. Assembly Bill 491, which was just enacted in 2025, now requires candidates to be registered voters within the jurisdiction that they are seeking to represent. They also have to meet all residency requirements for the office that they're running for. So timing, jurisdiction, and eligibility requirements are all important factors to ensure that the rest of the filing process runs smoothly. Next, we will go through the withdrawal and challenge periods because timing for both is critical. This is important. These are important to be aware of not only as a candidate who may challenge another, but also so you know when you're out of the challenge period. I'm going to use the non-judicial filing period that's coming up to provide examples. Starting with withdrawals, if a candidate decides to withdraw, it has to be submitted in writing and done in person with the appropriate filing office. For city offices, any withdrawals have to happen within 2 business days after the last day of filing, which is March 13th, 2026. That sets the deadline for the withdrawal of candidacy at March 17th, 2026. For non-city offices, the withdrawal window is a little bit longer. Candidates have 7 business days after the last day of filing to withdraw, which brings the deadline to withdraw for candidacy at March 24th, 2026. Now, for the challenge period, that clock is going to start the moment that the candidate files for office, and it's going to continue through 5 days after the last day to withdraw candidacy. That takes us to March 30th for anyone to submit a challenge. The key takeaways with withdrawals and challenges are the deadlines. The windows for submitting withdrawals and challenges are very short, and once they close, they close. Next, we will walk through the filing options and what is required. Candidates have a few different ways to file. They can file in person, which is what we recommend because it allows us to answer questions and ensure that the filing is correct. They can also file by mail, and there's also a virtual option to file. With the different methods, with the different filing methods, the requirements all stay the same. The filing paperwork has to be submitted to the correct filing office. Candidates have to pay the required filing fee, and it all has to be done during the candidate filing period. This means that there is some flexibility in how someone files, and that the requirements for filing with the correct filing office and within the correct filing time frame all stay the same. Next, we will walk through the Aurora candidate filing system and why we use it for candidate filing. First, if you haven't seen it yet, we created a proprietary candidate filing system using the same framework that is used for the filing of campaign finance reports and financial disclosure statements. And it can be found at aurora.nv.gov. Aurora helps to make the filing process clear and accessible for candidates. It's easy to access, it provides the correct office-specific filing paperwork for each office, and it greatly reduces the risk of data entry errors across multiple reports and documents. It also provides updates in real time, so you can see who else filed for the same office. The link to that list is on the Secretary's website, which is nvsos.gov, and then just go to the 2026 election information page. Using the Aurora candidate filing system, candidates can work through the process on their own schedule, rather than trying to do everything all at once. It is also a paperless option, which helps reduce errors and ensures that the process is efficient for both the candidates and for our staff. We are continuously working toward modernization and innovation with the Aurora candidate filing system, ensuring that we make it as accessible and user-friendly for everyone while improving the overall candidate filing experience. Now, as we are looking ahead, here's where we are and where we're going to be going. All 36 filing offices across the state are currently preparing for the non-judicial candidate filing period. This is typically the largest filing window in the election cycle, and it requires coordination and preparation. We are anticipating somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 candidates filing statewide next month. So this is a significant operational effort. Looking ahead to 2027, our focus will be evaluating the 2026 cycle, identifying updates and improvements based on what we learn, and continuing to enhance the Aurora candidate filing system. At the same time, we will be preparing for the October 2027 presidential preference primary candidate filing period, which is rapidly creeping up and will occur from October 1st to October 15th, 2027. Through all these efforts and actions, we are focused on continuous improvement. That concludes today's presentation on the candidate filing process, and I now welcome any questions, thoughts, or comments anyone would like to share.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols, for the excellent and informative presentation. Really appreciate it. Members, are there any questions for Mr. Nichols up in Carson City, down here at Las Vegas office?
I have a question.
Okay, well, I have a Assembly Member Dickman. I'll go to Assembly Member Dickman, and then we'll come back to Senator Steinbeck. And I hope I didn't miss you in the prior agenda item, Assembly Member Dickman.
No.
Hope if you have any questions, I can recall that.
No, I'm good. This is just a quick question. I'm just curious, as far as the residency requirements, who is actually responsible for, and what is the procedure for checking when someone files for office to make sure they are actually a resident of the office they're filing for, or do we just take the candidate's word?
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Mark Voloshin, for the record. It's an excellent question that comes up very frequently. In fact, the residency requirements for each elected office across our state is something that each candidate attests to under penalty of perjury. It gets a little bit more complicated nowadays by individuals who own houses in multiple states or perhaps travel internationally and the like. As to whether or not somebody truly lives in a certain location within their jurisdiction. But ultimately, and this is something that we talk about during the candidate filing process, the residency, the address of residency is included on the declaration of candidacy. It's attested to under penalty of perjury. And if there's some reason that an individual is identified to not truly reside at that actual residence, not figuratively or otherwise, but they have to actually reside there, then they're not eligible to be in that office. And even in the last couple of years, I think you may have seen individuals in elected office in our state that turned out maybe moved out of the state, were very quickly identified and removed from that office. But during the filing process specifically, again, the candidate is attesting under penalty of perjury as to their residency.
So quick follow-up.
Please go ahead, follow up, Assemblymember Dickman.
So if someone came to find out, maybe hired a private detective, this is all hypothetical, but a private detective or something, and found evidence that someone didn't actually live there, would, within the filing period, let's say, how would that be addressed?
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Mark Voloshin, for the record. So there's a couple ways. I guess that hypothetical situation could be addressed. If the candidate who was investigated was notified by somebody else that had an investigator and they laid out the information, that candidate could potentially choose to withdraw if it turned out that that was true. But if the candidate says, no, your investigator just happened to catch me while I was internationally traveling, I do in fact live here, it would potentially be a possible grounds for a challenge. There's a statute that talks about the challenge process, the requirement for the information to be provided to that filing officer, so that if it was a county commissioner, for example, that would go to the county clerk as opposed to a statewide or multi-county office, then you'd bring it to the filing office of the Secretary of State. Those filing officers review the information with their legal counsel, either the Office of the Attorney General for us or the county DA or city attorney. And then depending on the nature of that information, it gets moved over into the courts. And then ultimately a court would decide if the candidate who was originally challenged did in fact live in that location or not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. We will now go to Senator Steinbach.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was a comment, as I stated. I just wanted to compliment you on the Aurora system, the candidate filing system, the ease of putting in your forms and your financials. I've been really impressed, and just thank you very much for making that an easy process and something that you get the notifications on a timely manner. And it's real time like you described. And thank you for making running for office, that one part, so much easier.
Thank you for the comment, Senator Mark Voloshin, for the record. I will absolutely carry that to Secretary Aguilar, as well as to the many individuals on our staff and at the county and city levels who've worked extremely hard to make it as accessible as possible. We work very hard at things like that, but sometimes wonder if it impacts or lands properly, so your comments are very much appreciated.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Assemblymember Hibbets.
Thanks, Chair. And this is question for Mr. Velashin. Has there been any thought given to preparing for a decision in Watson v. RNC? And for context for anybody watching that doesn't know what this is a case in front of the Supreme Court that is going to be argued in March, and the decision will come out end of June, early July. And long story short, says that mail ballots cannot be counted after Election Day. Fifth Circuit said that that couldn't happen. It was appealed, went to the Supreme Court, and sometime this summer we're going to have a decision on it. We have no idea what the decision is going to be, but I'd just like to know if there's been thought given to what the state is going to do should that decision be upheld, and we have some sort of a plan so we're not flat-footed if that were to occur.
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Mark Velashin, for the record. Rest assured, election officials at the state, county, and city level are paranoid is probably not the right word, but we are concerned, and we look at a great number of different eventualities and possibilities, ranging from weather to Supreme Court decisions and how that would impact us. So flat-footed is not something that we would be caught when it comes to the Supreme Court's decision. Certainly something that's been telegraphed as well as it has. So yes, the short answer is we have been thinking about it. We've discussed internally what the messaging would look like in either direction, as there may be confusion from the electorate standpoint. We've also talked about what happens if the decision does not come out in late June, but if it comes out the 1st of June, while mail ballots are in the process of being returned to county election officials for processing. There's a number of different contingencies that we're planning for and prepared for. At the very least, started considering drafting documents, outreach information, social media campaign type documents as well, to make sure that we can reduce the impact of in-stream mid-election cycle changes as much as possible, given the impact and the possible confusion that it could cause to the electorate. Certainly able and available to go into more detail if you would like, perhaps separately. But again, that is something that we've, again, across the state, counties, and cities, been looking very closely at and considering what we would do in either direction, depending on what the Supreme Court decides.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to hear that you're on top of it.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Senator Daly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is not in relation to any of this stuff today. It's a separate question regarding, and I just want to find out where we're at or what the state might have done or what legislation might be needed to do. But I know, as you know, there's current litigation going on over requests from the federal government on our voter information, and we're disputing that they have a right to have that information, if they have any valid reason for it. Which then brings me to a couple of other issues, concerns, questions that I have. And I recall, and I got to lay this out a little bit, sorry. When we had the classified document case against then private citizen Trump with the Mar-a-Lago and the FBI going in and finding those classified documents, et cetera, et cetera. And I do recall shortly after that, the FBI agents, or the FBI was accused of planting those documents. They were never there. It's all false, et cetera. So immediately people started sowing distrust in the agencies that are collecting, getting that information. And I'm sure there are, no offense to these people, weak-minded individuals that believe that and still do. They're wrong, but nevertheless. Which then brings me to full case, and I'll get to my question here. When we had the Fulton County, Georgia execution of a subpoena to go in and get these documents, election documents, voting records, et cetera, from an election that was 5 years ago now. The same conspiracy theorists on the other side could be saying, well, whatever they have, now that it's been taken out of the possession of the Georgia election officials, recounted, counted twice, third time, all found to be correct and valid, that Trump lost that election in Georgia. Seems to me that now that the federal government has that, and if we have that distrust in the FBI and their execution of that, and then what, if anything, with the sycophants they have running the Justice Department, the FBI, various things, might do with that documentation. I don't know that any of it can be trusted now that it's out of the possession of anybody, right? They can manipulate it, we can be accused of manipulating it, et cetera. So as our state looked at, if we had a similar execution of a warrant, subpoena, for certain documents, that we would have and be able to retain our own copy of that information, so that we could say, no, here's the exact information that we gave you. We gave it to you, but we have a copy of it in case it comes back different than we originally do. I hate to sow or ask a question about that distrust, but it's been planted out there. And the administration and Trump himself has done, what I would say, immeasurable damage in the trust in all of these institutions, which is sad. But he would say just, he's done that by a lot, because I don't think he understands the meaning of immeasurable, but I digress. Any steps being taken by the state to secure that information in case you do get a warrant that says, hey, you have to give us this information, so that we have legitimate, verifiable copies of what the actual information is? And if we don't, we should.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Mark Voloshin for the record. Speaking of contingencies we've discussed, absolutely. The possibility of a judicially signed, legally executed warrant by members of the federal government on any one of our 17 counties absolutely is something that we've looked closely at. I think it's important to highlight the difference, I think, between our counties and what occurred in Fulton County, Georgia, or for that matter, in Puerto Rico, where last spring voting systems were seized by the members of the federal government as well. The Fulton County warrant, when we reviewed it, again, as you mentioned, it spoke specifically to information and documents relating to the 2020 election cycle. Nevada law is very clear, state and federal law for that matter is very clear, that there's a 22-month retention period for election materials. That timeline seems weird to a lot of folks, but it's simply logistics. When you think about Clark or Washoe counties, any of our counties, the warehouse space to store the election, the ballots, the rosters, information that comes back as being undeliverable, all of those things, they take up a lot of space. When it's 22 months after a federal election, that's really when you're about to send out things for your next election, and so you need to properly dispose of that information. Following the 2020 election cycle, there were litigation holds, as you probably remember, which pauses the disposal of those election information and materials until the courts are done adjudicating when appropriate. Those judicial or legal holds all came and went. And then our counties, all 17, again, complied with the requirements. And this is in 293, I think 391, if I remember right, that specifically says not just after 22 months you can, it mandates you must destroy the election materials after 22 months. I remember being told both by the previous registrar as well as the current one that Clark County, for example, and Washoe, I've been told, and the others, have destroyed the materials from 2020, in part because the 2022 election cycle rapidly approached. So I think when you think about Fulton County and what occurred there and its impact or possible mirroring on a Nevada county, I don't think there would be much, frankly, that the federal government could find. If, though, to extend your hypothetical into the 26 election cycle, which I think is maybe where you're going to go also, we have been discussing it and looking very closely at means to mitigate the risk of the taking of ballots both before or after tabulation. Equally concerning, I think if you look at the Fulton County, Georgia scenario, the federal government did not leave an inventory of what they took. They took things and left without the county having a clear sight picture understanding of what left their possession, which is also something that we've been discussing and working to mitigate across the state.
And I appreciate that, and the 22 months and all that stuff. So let's just say there was an issue or a similar circumstance for the 2024 process. We haven't hit the 22 months yet. That information still exists and is kept and required to be kept and then required to be destroyed. So we're in that window now, if they came. do we have a backup if they say, well, here's all the information, but do we have a copy that we would retain? And is there a contingency for that? I'm just asking the question, because no matter what happens, everyone's going to point the finger like the Scarecrow and the Wizard of Oz, right? I love the movie quotes, right? They went that way, right? And I'm just saying that we should have a backup if they want to. If they want the information, fine. You got an executable warrant, come and get it. But we should retain a copy of whatever it is they might take.
Thank you for the question, Senator Mark Velosh, for the record. Very much under consideration. We have a number of records. We have all the records, in fact, required under federal and state law relating to the 24 election, as you cited. How we would have a duplicate, again, when possible, that's being reviewed and considered. But in addition to our focus on the 26 election cycle is certainly something that we've been discussing.
And I appreciate that. I'm just trying to think of contingencies because, you know, you used to be able to say that we could trust the FBI and they were doing their jobs, they were professionals, and et cetera, et cetera. And I still think that they are currently, despite some of their leadership. I think the rank and file guys are doing their job, and I think they were under the Mar-a-Lago confidential records case as well. They were doing their job and didn't plant any evidence. But people just keep accusing, and I think we should have the backup to say, hey, you know, these are the actual documents that they took, and this is what they look like, this is what they still look like, and if they come back any differently, then we got a problem. And I'm just saying, in the world, it's sad that we have to think that way, but that's where we're at today.
Thank you so much. Anyone else for questions? All right, thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate your time as always. Next, we will move on to our final agenda item, which is our second period of public comment. As a reminder, we ask the public comments be kept to 2 minutes per person so that everyone interested in speaking can be accommodated. Information on how to provide public comment is available on the agenda. You may also submit public comment in writing, in addition to testifying or in lieu of testifying. I will start with those in Las Vegas. Does anybody wish to make public comment? Seeing none, I will go to Carson City. Does anybody wish to make public comment in Carson City? Seeing none, I will go to the phone lines. AVH, does anybody wish to make public comment?
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Again, to provide public comment, please press *9 to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon. This is Oscar Williams from Reno, Nevada. Hello and welcome. I have two concerns. One, I understand that the state ballot vendor ProVote is going to be verifying the voter rolls and revising them and then printing the ballots. Since when do we want third parties in another state to meddle with our voter rolls? I'm a little confused with that one. I don't think that's appropriate. But that's a nice segue to what I really want to talk about, because I filed a complaint against the Secretary of State back on February 10th, basically regarding noncompliance with laws, negligence, and the appearance of impropriety. I'd like to read you my introduction. I'll be happy to send you these documents. Let me go into this, and then I'll let you go. Mr. Aguilar, here comes my complaint of your efforts to undermine the protection of private information, weaken security and transparency of elections, and funding of leading-edge technology without proper oversight, creating the appearance of impropriety. My introduction. Personally identifiable information, PII, such as handwritten signature with full name and address, are exposed on election mailers, including return ballot envelopes, inviting ID theft and forgery. Whatever economy is achieved by doing so doesn't outweigh the risk to voters. And there is no notice of risk. No option to opt out of sharing my sensitive data with third parties, including error. Those are federal laws, by the way. There's federal laws that dictate that those things need to happen, and they're not happening. So that's part of the noncompliance right there. The Secretary wants to take responsibility to fully test and approve the new equipment, including poll pads and automated signature verification running on the Blue Crest Vantage sorter, delegating such authority to the counties. Voter verification systems are critical to a voter voting and having their votes counted and reported accurately. Yet the Secretary wants counties to shoulder the burden and the liability of approving the technology that he's pushing. These changes to regulations and new regulations weaken transparency and the security of sensitive data and transmission of such data. As a longtime resident and voter in Nevada, one who was a victim of ID theft and forgery in the past, I am disturbed by the path the Secretary is taking in elections and how it affects me and other Nevadans. On the one hand, the Secretary recognizes the sensitivity of certain data and cybersecurity risks, but on the other hand,
thank you so much. It has been over 2 minutes.
Mitigation of risk.
Thank you so much. If you can provide the rest of your comments to the committee in writing, I will definitely make sure we get them. AVH, can we please go to our next caller?
Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Gifford, ELLEN, GIFF as in Frank, ORD as in David. Thank you to this committee for a meeting that has been well organized and extremely informative. We're grateful for your work. Per our public comment at the beginning of this meeting, the Nevada Legislative website states that interim committees hold public hearings, direct research, and deliberate on proposals for legislation to be considered during the next legislative session. We respectfully request, again, that this committee exercise these duties and propose that legislation prohibiting acts of intimidation that prevent citizens from observing their election process be considered in the next Nevada legislative session. We also request that this committee lead the initiation of a process that will prevent these acts in the 2026 elections. Thank you.
Thank you. AVH, are there any more callers?
Chair, we have no additional callers choosing to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you so much. All right, if no members have any other additional comments with that, I will adjourn this meeting. The archived version of this meeting will be available online. Our next meeting is currently scheduled for Friday, April 17th. And with that, I do also want to give a special shout out to staff. Thank you so much for our very well and informative RAN meeting. So thank you. All right, with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Chair and Vice Chair.